Good evening. I'm Jim Lantelmi, Chair of the Arlington County Planning Commission, and welcome to our January 11th, 2021 public meeting, and I'm gaveling it to order with our makeshift gavel. The Planning Commission advises the County Board on matters pertaining to planning and development in the community, and this is the first of 2 evenings scheduled for our public hearings. Tonight, we will be hearing the proposal for the Ames Center Site Plan Number 1 and related rezonings. Now, some are items that I'm required to share with you now. For the safety of our staff and residents, we're holding this meeting virtually as we did for our earlier meetings this year. Welcome to our commissioners, county staff, applicants, and community members who are all joining us remotely. We are legally authorized to hold this virtual meeting based on the governor's executive orders, legislation adopted by the Virginia General Assembly, and the County Board's Continuity of Operations Ordinance adopted in March of 2020. Before we begin, I have a few specifics to orient everyone to our virtual environment. Today's meeting is available as a broadcast with closed captioning on Comcast Xfinity channels 25 and 1085. Verizon Fios channels 39 and 40 on the county's website. Audio of today's meeting is available via phone. If commissioners, presenters, or speakers lose internet connectivity during today's meeting, please reconnect to us by phone. You can use the number provided in the Teams invite. That's 1-347-973-6905 with a conference ID of 631-833-986#. And registered speakers have received our clerk, Ms. Johnson's telephone number in their speaker registration confirmation. For other presenters and speakers joining us through Microsoft Teams, please keep your phones and devices muted until you're called upon. Please turn off the sound to any other devices around you to minimize interference. When called upon to speak, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that's located on your meeting's command bar. The moderator does not have the ability to unmute you. If you're dialing in by phone, press *6 to unmute. Commissioners, if you wish to be recognized to speak, please use your hand raise function or turn on your video, unmute your microphone to signal your interest, and I'll call upon you in order. For public speakers, you will be called upon by the clerk at an assigned time. Pre-registration to speak at today's hearing was required. We're not able to accommodate additional speakers. Public comment will take place within the same time frames as we would provide in an in-person meeting. Speakers will have 3 minutes to comment as individuals, 5 minutes to speak if representing an organization. A speaking timer will be displayed on screen by the clerk. If you're dialing in by phone and unable to see the screen, we will provide an audible warning when 30 seconds are remaining. You will then be muted when your time has concluded. The meeting chat is active for presenters or commissioners who need technical assistance only. Do not use the meeting chat for discussion, public comments, questions about agenda items, or requests for more information. All public comment must be shared verbally for the record during the assigned public testimony period. Lastly, this is a public forum. Tonight's meeting will be recorded and posted to the county's website, and all information associated with today's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act requirements. With that all said, our quorum is here, and Madam Clerk, please call the first item.
Thank you, and Happy New Year to everyone. Item number 1 has 3 parts. 1A is a rezoning, Z-2622-19-1. 1B, the site plan for the Ames Center, and 1C, the ordinances of vacation to vacate. We have Michael Cullen to present this item to us this evening.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. This is Michael Cullen with the Arlington County Planning Office. I just want to be sure that everybody sees the presentation full screen. Is that correct?
Yes, I see it.
Excellent. Okay, so again, I'm going to be talking briefly about the Ames Center project. So this item includes 3 requests associated with the project, including a rezoning from CO to CO Roslyn, a site plan amendment for a new mixed-use residential development, and proposed modification of use regulations, and the requested vacation of portions of street and utilities easements on Fort Myer Drive, as well as walkway easements across the site along Fort Myer Drive. The site is located between Wilson Boulevard and the intersection of Fort Myer Drive and North Nash Street, and it's across Fort Myer from the Roslyn Metro Station. Turnberry Tower condominiums are located across the intersection to the north, and the 1812 North Moore and Roslyn City Center sites are located to the east. The Hyatt-centric Arlington Hotel abuts the site to the south, and the Oak Hill and Nash Street office buildings are located across Nash Street to the west. The site area is approximately 78,000 square feet, and it includes the parcel occupied by the Arlington Temple United Methodist Church and the existing Sunoco gas station. And so, similar to other Metro Corridor areas, Roslyn is, as many know, experiencing a robust amount of development activity. For additional context, this slide illustrates approved site plans that are still active or undeveloped, notably including the 1401 Wilson project just to the west that was approved in 2014, and the Roslyn Holiday Inn project to the north approved in 2019, and known site plans that are currently under review. So the site, as I mentioned, is subject to site plan number 1, which was initially approved by the county board in March 1962 for a 12-story office building and a conceptual plan for the church, or for a church. The Ames Center office building was constructed in 1966, and the church was constructed in 1971. The county board approved a site plan amendment in April of 1973 in order to separate a portion of the site along Wilson Boulevard from the site plan area and create a new site plan under Site Plan 92 that is now occupied by the Hyatt-centric Arlington Hotel. In 1996, the county board amended the GLUP to add the Roslyn Coordinated Redevelopment District as a special district and adopted zoning ordinance provisions for the CO Roslyn District. In July 2015, the board adopted the Roslyn Sector Plan as an update to the 1992 Roslyn Station Area Plan Addendum. So these images provide views of and around the site, including starting clockwise from the top left, Nash Street looking north, and then the intersection of Nash and Fort Myer looking south, the church and gas station parcel looking west across Fort Myer Drive, and then the Fort Myer Drive tunnel looking north. So the current GLUP designation is High Office Apartment Hotel, and the existing zoning is CO, and the applicant is proposing to rezone to CO Roslyn. So in addition to rezoning, the amendment includes or proposes a new mixed-use development with 2 30 and 31-story towers consisting of 740 total units, with a proposed, or I guess up to 225 of those units proposed for interim hotel use for no longer than 5 years. Approximately 10,000 square feet of retail space, 8,300 square feet of commercial office or retail flex space, and then 16,600 square feet associated with a redeveloped church space, and then 7,800 square feet associated with a redeveloped gas station space. Proposed modifications include additional density exclusions, required parking, compact parking percentage, loading requirements, and of course other modifications as necessary. The applicant has also requested a modification for increased mechanical penthouse height, but as I will discuss later, staff does not support the request at this time. Additional density above the base amount identified by the sector plan is proposed to be achieved through LEED Silver certification and Arlington priority credits. In addition to committed on-site affordable housing units, a cash contribution for off-site transportation improvements, removal of elevated skywalks, and achievement of a primary segment of the 18th Street corridor. So the subject site is located within the Roslyn Coordinated Redevelopment District, identified in the GLUP, and subject to the recommendations of the Roslyn Sector Plan. The illustrative plan identifies the site for redevelopment with 2 new building towers, this is an image of the illustrative plan here at right, one of which is located over much of the existing church and gas station parcel. And the site orientation is intended to facilitate the alignment of the 18th Street corridor. Fort Myer Drive is also labeled for conversion as a 2-way street with noted removal of the Fort Myer Tunnel and Skywalk pedestrian bridges removed above Nash Street and Fort Myer Drive. The sector plan identifies total sidewalk widths, including a portion of Fort Myer streetscape designated to a wider 20 to 22 foot width along the south building tower. And the plan identifies protected bike facilities on Nash Street and Fort Myer Drive around the site. The plan envisions a network of parks and open spaces throughout Roslyn, including redesigned plazas along the 18th Street corridor. The plan doesn't commit to common design elements, but does encourage a variety of experiences within the corridor. The Ames Center Plaza is identified as a linking space on map 313, which would provide for connections between other open spaces within the integrated network. It is also assigned as a quote, revitalizing space typology, which calls for passive space opportunities and amenities such as seating, gardens, public art, or other suitable features. The plan describes development of the Ames Center Plaza as part of the corridor in detail, naming this segment the Roslyn Steps, and noting it is generally envisioned to provide a public way through the site for pedestrian and bicyclist travel. The plaza should maintain a minimum 60 feet between building faces, with buildings sited to maintain direct visual and physical connections between Metro Station Plaza and the intersection of North Oak Street and 18th Street North. So building massing and form within Roslyn are informed heavily by the priority view corridors from the observation deck at the Central Place site. These priority view corridors are shown here on the right, and the resulting building heights map indicates a maximum 310-foot building height above average site elevation for the south tower, and then a maximum 300-foot height for the north tower that also tapers down to 270 feet above the church parcel. The sector plan recognizes the value of the observation deck views and calls for, quote, special attention to protect and enhance high priority public observation deck view corridor. Plans go on to say, and I'm quoting at length, building tops within view of the public observation deck should be designed so as to create a thoughtful, complementary foreground view for the monumental core and other key vistas, minimizing any adverse visual impact, sculpting, transparency, and other design strategies to minimize the height and size of penthouses should be considered in order to better preserve views. So the applicant has provided images, which are shown at the top of this slide, that reflect approximately how the elevator overruns impact views from the observation deck in accordance with sector plan guidance. Staff finds that the elevator overruns, also visible in the bottom rendering, do pose an adverse visual impact and conflict with the goal of minimizing the height and size of penthouses. The project will provide a number of standard site plan condition benefits, including installation of a wireless emergency responder communication system and utility underground fund, public art fund, and base affordable housing contributions in order to achieve the base GLUP density for the site. The project would also provide significant sidewalk and intersection improvements and address sector plan goals for elements such as protected bike facilities on Nash Street, protection of priority view corridors as mentioned, and construction of a major segment of the 18th Street corridor. The applicant has agreed to a community benefits package that achieves several primary goals of the sector plan in exchange for additional density above 4-point FAR, including the provision of 24 on-site committed affordable housing units at 80% AMI, a $5 million cash contribution for off-site transportation improvements, construction and ongoing maintenance of the Central Plaza, again as a major segment of the corridor, connection to Metro, and then removal of the Skywalks above Nash Street and Fort Myer. To implement the agreed upon community benefits, the applicant has proposed optional phasing of the site plan, where phase 1 consists of construction of the south building tower and would require contributions of 13 CAFs, a $2 million transportation contribution, and then adjacent site improvements. Phase 2 would require all remaining elements, including 11 CAFs, a $3 million contribution, and then the remaining elements, including skywalk removal and all other, and the Central Plaza. So the SPRC held 3 opportunities for input on the proposed site plan amendment between February 2020 and September, including an in-person meeting, an online engagement opportunity, and a virtual SPRC meeting. Transportation Commission heard the item in March 2020 and recommended approval for the project on January 7th. The project will be heard by the Housing Commission on Thursday. So in closing, staff recommends approval for the proposed rezoning from CO to CO Roslyn for an amendment to redevelop the site with a new mixed-use multifamily residential development, including modifications for additional density, density exclusions, required parking, compact parking percentage, loading requirements, and other net modifications as necessary to achieve the proposed development plan. Staff does not recommend approval of the modification for additional mechanical penthouse, which is reflected in condition 62 of the proposed site plan ordinance. Finally, staff recommends approval of the request to vacate portions of street and utility easements on Fort Myer Drive and walkway easements across the site and along Fort Myer Drive. Thank you. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Cullen. Do we have the applicant ready? To go off mute.
Mr. Whitmore, you are on.
I will first go off mute, then I will share my screen for the presentation. Thank you. Great. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Terrific.
Yes.
Well, thank you for your time this evening, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. My name is Kedrick Whitmore. I'm with Venable, and I represent the applicant in this matter, Snell Properties, for the redevelopment of the Ames Center. So a quick overview of what we'll be discussing in our presentation this evening. Mr. Cullen did a, sorry, seems to be stuck here. I'm going to just use, can you all still see my screen here?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you. I'm gonna have to present in this view. It's not working for some reason in the other. So Mr. Cullen did a good job of presenting the context and location of the property, so I won't go back through that. He did mention that this is site plan number 1, which I think is a very cool piece of Arlington County history. You can see some of the photographs of when this was the Murphy and Ames lumber yard before Snell Properties developed it into the Ames Center in the 1960s. We also went over some site photographs. Suffice it to say that the existing conditions really do reflect the design of the time. You'll see the street presence is almost non-existent, a very unfriendly place for pedestrians, and some things that we're hoping to really remedy with this proposed development. So an overview of the project in general, and I think one theme that I want to keep coming back to that I want to make sure you keep in mind throughout this is that of resiliency. We've really worked hard and been thoughtful in designing this project to make it resilient, to make it adaptable to the changes that we see through the life cycle of a building, and make sure that it remains a viable part of Roslyn throughout that time. As you can see, we propose to redevelop the site with 2 residential towers, approximately 740 residential units, along with ground floor retail. We are also going to be rebuilding the church and the gas station in place. So as Mr. Cullen mentioned, the 18th Street corridor really is one of the most important recommendations of the sector plan. And we really revolved our whole design around creation and maintenance of that 18th Street corridor. As you can see here, it aligns almost exactly with the vision recommended in the sector plan. We actually brought this project forward several years ago with a different design that staff told us was not consistent with the sector plan. And so knowing the importance of the 18th Street corridor, we went back to the drawing board. We moved the 18th Street corridor farther north to the location you see it in here and incorporated the church into our design. Not only do we include the 18th Street corridor, but I think we enhance upon it too with a lot of the site and building design. So as you can see here, we've made a conscious effort to peel back the buildings at the entrances to the 18th Street corridor, both on the west and the east. These blue dashed lines are the 60-foot minimum, but as you can see, we've done quite a lot to try to expand and open up the entrance to the 18th Street corridor, really giving it more life and visibility within Roslyn. So I'll walk you through now the ground floor plan. There is a pretty significant grade change here. So you'll note that there are two ground floor plans. This is the Fort Myer Drive, the lower of the two ground floors. And I'll start at the north end of the site, which is here, plan right. And you can see at this level, the gas station is going to remain. We will then have our entrance to the parking garage for the north building. And then you'll see a really significant amount of retail here that we think is going to really do a great job of activating both Fort Myer Drive and the 18th Street corridor. And then at the southern end is the loading entrance. And I think this is a really important element that I do want to spend a little bit of time on. We've designed this loading area to be head in, head out. That is not something you see very frequently in Arlington. And what it does is it allows all of those turning movements, delays, things that would normally spill out onto the street to all be taken care of internally. And we think that's really going to help the operations of the building going forward. So here you can see the other of the ground floors, that on the Nash side, a little higher elevation. You can see this is the elevation at which the church is located. We've got our lobbies here and some of our retail and commercial along here. And you'll note that this area is designated as commercial rather than retail. We know that in the wake of COVID-19, retail may change, street activation may change. So we want to try to maintain flexibility and, again, resiliency so that we can continue to activate the street while being nimble and responding to the demands of the market that are going to take place after COVID. A little more on the design of the 18th Street corridor. We've really intentionally designed this area to be more green, more intimate, with some respite from some of the urban spaces throughout Roslyn. And as you heard Mr. Cullen discuss, that's one of the visions for the 18th Street corridor in this area. And we think that that is really going to come through here in the green spaces that we've provided. One of the things we're really proud of is the accessibility of the 18th Street corridor. You know, despite the grade change in place here, we've been able to make almost the entirety of the 18th Street corridor accessible to people with mobility issues. The only spot where there is not a ramp where folks can use a wheelchair or a stroller is here, where there is an elevator traversing that pretty significant grade from the higher elevations to the lower. Here's just a section showing you the extent of that grade change. We're talking around 14 feet, so a pretty significant grade change there. I should also mention that on that accessibility issue, we worked very closely with Rosemary Ciotti, and she was willing to meet with us several times, gave us a lot of great feedback. So thank you, Commissioner Ciotti, if you're here tonight. Want to briefly talk about the architecture. The architectural Lombaranas has done a really terrific job here. They have taken the massing of these buildings, really stepped them to create a really comfortable scale and great proportion. You'll also notice throughout these renderings that biophilic design is a really important principle, integrating the green spaces and terraces on the building with those of the 18th Street corridor. You'll note that there is also an undulating facade here to provide some visual interest, along with quite a few functional balconies for the residential units there. So we think a really terrific job overall, world-class architecture from SBA in this project. Also want to touch briefly on the church. We think it really captures, the new design captures on the really prominent location as a community gathering space that this church has. And really like this rendering here as an entrance to the site, really showing the light coming in that new church facade, which we're very excited about. So you heard Mr. Cullen discuss the elevator overrun issue. That's the last remaining outstanding issue with staff. And I want to talk about that in a little more depth here now. I want to be very clear that this is not a building height issue. The building heights in Roslyn are very specifically prescribed by both the sector plan and the zoning ordinance. And we, in all facets, meet the requirements and recommendations of those building heights. Rather, this is a building penthouse height issue. And I will explain to you why we need the additional height here. So in buildings of this size, at this height, the elevator needs to actually overrun somewhat higher than the last floor that it serves. And so what you'll see on the left is what would result in the event that we were not permitted to extend the elevator penthouse up beyond the typical 13-foot penthouse height. And that would mean that the elevator overrun would actually have to be housed here in the penthouse, and the penthouse mechanical floors would be totally inaccessible through elevators. What we're asking for instead is for a very small area, and you can see how little of the roof area is taken up by these penthouse overruns, that a very small area be permitted to extend an additional 13 feet above the 23-foot penthouse height to allow for access to these penthouse mechanical areas by elevator. We've worked closely with the building code official. I know staff has talked with the building code official and confirmed that this is relatively typical practice for buildings of this height in the industry. So what's the problem? The concern that we heard, and you heard Mr. Cullen mention it, is that of views. But I'm going to show you now that this really does not have any impact on the views in Roslyn. So what we have here is a couple of renderings showing the priority view corridors from the observation deck. And it's these views that the height scheme and view recommendations of the sector plan are really oriented around. You could see those priority view corridors kind of shooting out like lasers here out of the observation deck. And what you'll see is the Upper Potomac Gorge view, that protected priority view shed, is the one closest to the Ames Center proposed buildings here. And what you'll see is that we've stepped down our building in accordance with the height requirements of the sector plan in order to preserve that view. You'll see here in the rendering on the upper right that the elevator overrun is well outside of that Upper Potomac Gorge view. I'll reiterate that everything that is not within the red shaded area is not a priority view in terms of the sector plan. Now, even for those areas that are not priority views, this elevator overrun is not going to have any visual impact. You can see here in the orange, this is the location of the 1401 Wilson building, which Mr. Cullen identified as an approved but not yet built building. And you can see that when we overlay the elevator overrun on the location of that proposed 1401 building, it doesn't push past the heights of the 1401 building. In other words, any view that would be blocked by this penthouse overrun would already be blocked by 1401 Wilson. So a couple of other views here to talk about. As you can see, this is a view looking directly west. The view we saw previously was kind of northwest up through here. This is directly west from the observation deck. And again, you can really not see much of these penthouse overruns beyond the location of 1401 Wilson. Again, that's in the orange here that you see in the background. And then when you move down a couple of levels, down to level 17, you'll see you can't really make out the penthouses at all. We also took a look at this from our neighbors to the north from Turnberry Towers, both at the 27th level and the 24th level. At the 27th level, you can just barely see the top of the penthouse overrun on the south tower. You can't see it at all from the 24th level. So Mr. Cullen mentioned views in the sector plan and trying to cut down and mitigate some of the impediments to those views. I want to be real clear, though, that that quote that he showed you talks about the views as described on pages 170 through 175 of the sector plan. Those pages describe the priority view corridors. They do not describe all views from the observation deck. And as we've shown, there is no impact on those priority view corridors. I will say that that quote also talks about mitigation strategies, and we're completely open to that. We think that there are quite a few things that could be done with these overruns to make them more visually pleasing. Here are a couple of examples. We're open to talking with staff about it. We think it can be accretive to the skyline of Roslyn. A lot of what we heard during the Realize Roslyn process was a desire to get away from monotonous, boring skylines. This can be an opportunity to do something more than just have a flat roof on top of the building. So I'll leave this portion of the discussion at that, but I would ask that you all consider removing condition number 62 as proposed by the staff in your recommendation so that you can allow for these penthouse heights to be increased and allow for proper operations of our penthouse. Moving on here briefly to transportation. As Mr. Cullen mentioned, we have been to the Transportation Commission last week. You can see here that the kind of 60s urban design of the site is replicated in the number of curb cuts. We've luckily been able to really consolidate those in our plan. The gas station is going to remain, but as you can see, the entrances to the residential buildings are consolidated down to 2, along with that head-in, head-out loading we discussed earlier. This is really going to be a huge benefit to the pedestrian environment in Roslyn once this project is completed. Obviously, the 18th Street corridor itself is going to be a great pedestrian way, but we've also, I think, made things a lot safer for pedestrians here on the north side of the project. As you can, if you're familiar with the site, currently there's a slip lane here, and anyone wanting to cross Nash or Fort Myer from the north has to cross the slip lane, find a pedestrian refuge, and then ultimately cross the street. What we've proposed to do is to bulb out the concrete here to extend the area of sidewalk and the pedestrian ability to move and really reduce those crossing distances pretty significantly. Something else that we're very excited about is the addition of protected bike lanes both ways on Nash Street. We think that's going to be a real contribution to the cycling environment here in Roslyn. So just a moment about parking. You know, when we came in with this project initially, it was parked at a 0.81 ratio. And we were told that was too high and to kind of go back to the drawing board and reduce that parking. And we appreciate that feedback, and we did it. We dropped that ratio down to a 0.72, and we were also able to remove one level of above grade parking. So in addition to that removal of a level of above grade parking, we've done something that I think is pretty unique and exciting with respect to the remaining above grade parking. And again, speaks to the resiliency of this building and this building design. And that is to create these parking structures, parking levels that are convertible, that can be used as a residential use in the future. And what does that mean? You know, to the extent that car ownership demand and use continues to drop, as we hope it will, we're not going to be stuck with a building that has obsolete, unusable above grade space. Rather, we're going to be able to adapt. We're going to be able to convert that space to residential and make it useful and increase the useful life of this building. So here's another rendering showing where that parking level is being removed. A few comments on sustainability. At the outset, I want to say that this building was designed, submitted, and accepted prior to the most recent updates to the community energy plan. And so what you'll see there reflects the requirements and recommendations of that prior plan and not necessarily the plan that's in place today. However, we have worked really hard with sustainability staff throughout the public process and tried to meet as many of the goals as we can as possible that are set forth in the current community energy plan. So a couple of those I want to talk about now. The first of which is related to the carbon in the building. You know, there's been a significant focus on addressing carbon, and we're going to perform a building life cycle assessment to measure the embodied carbon related to the building construction and the materials. And through that, we're going to be able to explore opportunities, things like low carbon concrete, to try to reduce the overall carbon emissions and the embodied carbon in the site. We've also committed to an energy savings of a minimum of 15% above ASHRAE. As you all are aware, that's been heavily emphasized by sustainability staff in recent years. And then what I think is another really exciting, and again, another really resilient factor here is related to electric vehicles. We have, at pretty significant expense, gotten Dominion to provide a much larger vault for electrical vault than typical for this building. And what that's going to allow us to do is to provide for electrical vehicle charging for 100% of the spaces that are located below grade. Now, that will not be in place day one. We don't think that the demand is there yet, but we're going to have the capability to, when that demand arises, as we know it will at some point, to run a conduit very quickly and provide 100% electric vehicle parking below grade in the garage. So again, another example of this building being resilient, being adaptable, and something we're very excited about. My last slide here, just want to touch on community benefits. Mr. Cullen referenced it already, but obviously the 18th Street corridor, on-site affordable units. Of those 24 units, 12 of them will be ANSI Type A. 10 of our market rate units will be ANSI Type A. We will be making the $5 million contribution to the Fort Myer Drive Tunnel. We are removing the pedestrian bridges. We're incorporating the church into this project. We're providing the protected bike lanes. And really, again, I think providing a building that can be resilient, adaptable, and flexible, and is going to remain a prominent point in Roslyn for a very long time. So with that, thank you. I appreciate your time, and we'll obviously be available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Woodward. Madam Clerk, do we have any public speakers?
Yes, we do. Our first speaker for the evening is Dr. Bernard Byrne, followed by Mr. Gifford Hampshire.
Welcome, Mr. Byrne.
Yes, hello. Yeah, can you see me or hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
I should be able to see me too. I have two concerns. One involves the building height, and the other concerns the landscaping along the corridor. The building heights. There's a real problem with the sector plan. We have to look at the observation deck, the views from the observation deck, which in this case, it looks like the building, because of the sector plan, is going to block the view to the west. In addition, that building on Wilson Boulevard may block it unless that site plan is revised for some reason. The priority view corridors really only protect the views of federal properties. They review views DC, the memorials, Pentagon. They don't protect the review of the views of Arlington. That's probably because the observation deck wasn't built at that time. Nobody appreciated this. This building, any future ones, are going to completely obliterate the view to the west. I can't tell that for sure, but it looked like it from those pictures that the applicant was showing and the staff was showing. So the LRPC, the Long Range Planning Commission, needs to revisit the sector plan and really see how you can lower those proposed building heights so that people will be able to see Arlington. Otherwise, people will no longer be able to see where they live or work. I mean, this is a major defect. It was overlooked completely. It was not even mentioned, as far as I can tell, on this. That being said, you should consider lowering, getting a really good view of what is being blocked off by this building, regardless of what might happen with the Wilson Boulevard plan. And you really have to look at this before you even approve this project, because this is one of the main blockers. I'm just as concerned about the future buildings that are planned that will further block it. As I say, you're not going to be able to see the Roslyn-Boston corridor. You're not going to be able to see I-66. None of these things. You won't be able to see Tyson's Corner. This is what that sector plan and this project will contribute to. Okay, enough said on that, but please address this and send us the LRPC for revision of the sector plan. The other problem is the landscaping of the 18th Street corridor and the surroundings. This really has too much pavement and too much impervious surfaces. Yes, I agree. He says it's green. It really is some green, but it has more pavement than needed. And this should be narrowed. That should be done. In addition, there's no specification yet of the plants that will be in the areas. There should only be plants near the trees, et cetera, that support pollinators. They should not be grasses. Or anything like that doesn't support pollinators. I suggest that the applicant, as landscape architect, consult with Alonzo Albogatis of the Department of Park and Recreation's naturalist, and get details so that this does support pollinators, especially monarch butterflies. You need milkweed there, and specifically a species called Aceriaca. But you need to consult with the naturalist to see what goes into that little bit of planting space you have there, and also the apartments. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Byrne. Our next speaker, Mr. Hampshire.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. My name is Gifford Hampshire. I'm with the law firm of Blankenship and Keith. We represent Soho LLC, which is the operator of the Hyatt Centric Arlington, which is just to the south. And as you may know, Hyatt has operated the hotel for many years pursuant to a ground lease that dates from 1973. And Mr. Cullen referred to site plan number 2 in his remarks. And I'm submitting these comments on behalf of the Hyatt on this special exception site plan amendment. The Planning Commission should know that the height and density that is requested here is conditioned on the idea that that the property owner will be able to build to the property line, and that issue is in litigation at this time with a hearing set currently for January 26 and 27. But regardless of the outcome of that litigation, Hyatt is concerned that the applicant requests twice the density and almost twice the height that's allowed pursuant even to a special exception in the Roslyn CO mixed use district. And that was stated by staff. 4.8 FAR and 180 feet is what's allowed even with a special exception. Page 32 of the staff report sets forth staff's analysis how more than doubling the gross floor area is justified by Arlington County Zoning Ordinance 7.15.4. However, I submit to you, and all these comments are set forth in my written comments to you earlier today, that the staff report does not really go through and tell you how the contributions and the other things set forth there justify a height of almost double and a gross floor area of more than double of what is allowed by the zoning ordinance. Now, keep in mind, it's the zoning ordinance that controls here, and specifically zoning ordinance 7.15.4. The sector plan is an important guide, but it's only a guide. And I refer to you, I am aware of map 3.16 at page 169 of the sector plan. But again, that is a guide. We are also concerned about the impact upon traffic. The traffic impact analysis here shows the conversion of 7 lanes southbound up the hill to 2. And it shows that Wilson Boulevard at Fort Myer Drive will continue to operate at failing at an F, and that also the intersection, the southbound approach of Key Boulevard and North Nash Street will fail where it would not fail were it not for this project. We submit to you that some of the benefits here that are talked about are good benefits, but they don't necessarily justify an increase of height and density to this extent. And I point to you the affordable dwelling unit contribution, 24 units out of 700 and some that are requested, and only at 80% of the market value. With that, I will rely upon my written comments that I submitted earlier, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. We now have Ms. Prell from the Roslyn Civic Association. Unmute yourself, Ms. Prell.
Unmute me, I'm sorry. This is Terry Prell from North Roslyn Civic Association. We have several issues. First, I want to say that was not mentioned this evening, but I have spoken with others to the staff to find out that the planters which you are showing on slides 20, 21, 33, and 34, with lots of lovely greenery coming across the building, making it a very biophilic looking space, will not be maintained by the building and may not exist. I think it was one of the things about this building that those of us who looked at it were most pleased to see, and that it felt not so stark. We have a lot of issue with the elevator overrun. It is in conflict with the sector plan, and be quite truthful, it's just ugly. There are accessible units, we're glad to see that, but I don't see anything about, affordable units, but I didn't see anything about any accessibility units. North Nash Street is our biggest concern. There are lots of issues. The Hyatt representative, Mr. Hampshire, just mentioned this is a street that leads to a failing intersection, and you're going to make the street smaller. You're going to add 2 bike lanes, one of which is protected. You are going to add last I heard, a floating bus stop, which means it will stop in the middle of the street and stop traffic because it is very narrow. You have removed a great deal of parking along North Nash Street. And I have not seen anything in the plan which tells us if there's how much visitor parking there will be available for people visiting people in these units or for retail parking. And people just come to Roslyn sometimes and want to park and walk around. And this, you've made it so there's almost no parking at all on North Nash. And I don't know any place that's designated for parking for Uber or Lyft or delivery services, which will also complicate traversing on North Nash. I think the thing with plants is a very attractive building, and we're very pleased with many parts of how the building is structured. But without the biophilic emphasis, I think it's a stark, white, unpleasant space, and we don't need another place like that in Roslyn. And I mean, thank you very much for your time, and that's all I'm going to say today.
Thank you, Ms. Pearl. I think we have now, is this correct? We've completed the public commenters, Madam Clerk?
That's correct.
Okay. We do have some commissions here. Do we have C2E2?
Yes. This is Joan McIntyre speaking for C2E2.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. We do welcome the applicant's commitment to trying to reduce the embedded carbon, but overall we're disappointed that the applicant is committing really only to silver LEED status and is unwilling to conduct a zero carbon analysis. The recently revised green building incentive policy, as mentioned, actually makes gold LEED status as the baseline and is something that we would expect the applicants to consider to take into account even before the update of the policy. The proposed building, which is going to be around for decades, is really inconsistent with the county's goal of being carbon neutral by 2050. And in fact, I would say it runs counter to the applicant's own claim of being resilient for the life cycle of the building. We are in a climate crisis, and as we've seen a record-shattering hurricane season this year, devastating wildfires, and temperatures reached matched past records for last year. So climate change is here, and urgent action is really essential to prevent a climate catastrophe. So to meet the CEP goals for carbon neutrality, the Ames Center should meet the following criteria: full electrification of all systems and appliances, or at a minimum ensure that the electrical system is designed to transition to an all-electric building. On-site combustion of natural gas is inconsistent with zero carbon building, and at this point should no longer be considered a transition fuel. In a recent study on building electrification done by the county, Stephen Winters Association concluded that the electric technologies for HVAC systems are mature and with careful design constraints that are related to the building height can be addressed. While centralized heat pump hot water systems are for large residential buildings are actually still maturing, pilots are underway, and it should provide a pathway to electrifying these systems as well. The plan commits to only 15% improvement of energy efficiency over ASHRAE baseline. More consistent with carbon zero standard would be at least 20% and ideally 25% or more, which would be about a 10 points in optimized energy efficiency or more. And this can be done through a variety of different ways. Commitment to on-site or off-site renewable energy would be another thing that we would be looking for. On-site solar panels could be combined with green roof that will keep the panels cooler and can also have advantages for managing stormwater runoff. While it wouldn't account for a large portion of energy requirements, it would make a good statement of commitment. In addition, the applicant should also consider virtual power purchase agreements to secure off-site sources for renewable electricity. And finally, we would hope to see a zero carbon assessment that would help to identify a viable pathway to zero carbon from the start, or at least provide information that they can design the building to make sure that it can transition at the earliest possible time. on transportation is that we are actually welcome the applicant's commitment to wiring the underground parking for EV chargers. It would be nice if they had at least 5 to 10% parking spaces already with EV chargers. And then also we would encourage the applicant to design some of the ground. We are encouraged that the applicant is designing the ground parking spaces to allow for conversion to other residential uses, as hopefully demand for parking would decline. And finally, we are more or less encouraged with the planned Woodland Garden concept. It looks appealing and will offer respite for the residents and workers within Arlington. So we really encourage the applicant to maximize the green space there and provide opportunities for people to enter and engage with the green space. And then again, also planned stormwater management systems is also noteworthy with the aims of capturing and slowing the release of stormwater. Applicants should consider tapping into stormwater for use in watering landscape planting, eliminating the need for municipal water for such purposes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now talk about the Transportation Commission meeting. The TC met last Thursday night, January 7th, and the discussion there revolved around a number of items. For the 18th Street corridor, we talked about a possible traffic light on Fort Myer Drive, and that will be evaluated after the tunnel is removed, but there is still the probability that one will be installed there. There will not be a traffic light on North Nash Street, and the discussion there revolved around the design to make it more pedestrian friendly and safer rather than just simply being a street with some stripes on it. We did talk about the elevator access that makes it ADA compliant along the 18th Street corridor, as Mr. Whitmore had raised in his presentation. That was acceptable. There was some concern at Transportation Commission about the density and the added traffic, given the number of new projects in the vicinity. That was raised by one of the commissioners. As far as parking goes, there was a general approval of dropping one of the parking levels from the above ground parking and dropping the overall ratio down to I think it's 0.79. That was, again, a number of the commissioners would prefer fewer cars parked there, but the drop by the applicant was welcome. The loading zone design is good. It is, as noted, it's a head-in, head-out design, which will make it safer for pedestrians walking by. No big trucks will be backing out. The commission also believed that the street vacation is consistent with the MTP. It also specifically has no opinion on the elevator overrun issue. The vote by the Transportation Commission was to accept the county manager recommendations with 9 in favor, none opposed, and 1 abstention. And that is the report of the Transportation Commission. Before we move on, I'd like to ask is whether Ms. Collier from DES wants to talk about the vacation, which I did just mention.
Yes, well, the vacations are basically portions of street and utilities easements around the perimeter of the site, and then 2 walkway easements through the site, which, here I can put up the 2 walkway easements through the site, which expire on their own terms anyway when the building comes down, but out of an abundance of caution, we are going to go ahead and vacate. And it's all, staff's opinion, it's all consistent with the comprehensive plan. That's it.
Okay, very good. Short and sweet. We can now move on to Commissioner Siegel, who chaired the SBRC. Do you have your report ready?
Yes, I do. What I'd like to do is very quickly first list the issues that we grappled with at SPRC, and how we resolved really most of the issues. Although today's Planning Commission meeting, other issues have been raised, and I think we'd like to talk a little bit about those. But let me just go through the big issues that we encountered and solved. The Skywalks were one of the first issues, large issues that we had to deal with. There is an interim condition in the plan, the Roslyn Sector Plan, which effectively says that Skywalks will not be removed until the pedestrian circulation can be fortified and made safer. There were no voices at this SPRC for this building at this time to enforce that interim condition. So we're left with the final condition, which is to remove the skylights. At the same time, we talked extensively about pedestrian safe circulation around the site. And you saw from a staff report a couple of the provisions and improvements that would be made in that regard. For example, mid-block crossing, once Fort Myer Drive tunnel is removed, building out bumps so that the streets are narrower, and I'll leave you to read the absolute details of that. The other couple of issues, the parking ratio. We worked very hard to reduce the a number of above grade parking levels, and we went from 0.81 down to 0.72. I think some of us were still some of that with a site so near the metro, it's really across the street. We would have liked to see something lower than that, but we did take solace from the fact that we thank the applicant for reducing that one level. I will have a couple of questions about the masking of the parking, above grade parking structures. It looks like they're glassed in. I can't see further, so that may be something we want to talk about a little bit. There are two or three issues that you want to think about with above grade parking in Roslyn. They were to be wrapped in active uses or masked by architecture. It looks like from the exhibits that the masking has taken shape, but I think we might want to talk a little bit more about that. We've also heard that the structure of these above ground levels can be converted. Some parking, the floor plate has to be strong enough to support a different use. We welcome that. The final, so I've mentioned the three things: close to metro, what the wrapping actually looks like. I mean, do you look in and see cars there, or is that somehow masked in some way? And we did get the ratio down. We talked extensively about bicycle circulation in the Roslyn Sector Plan. North Nass Street was supposed to have 2 protected bike lanes. We only saw 1. Jane Kim, we thank her very much, of DES, got together with us and we talked about that. And I think we came up with a solution that, as you heard, Transportation Commission is happy about, and I think the SPRC was happy about too. Did want to say that there was a lot of happiness and delight. I don't remember ever often using that terminology for some of our SPRCs with the Woodland plaza design of the space between the two towers. And we do thank the applicant for working really over a period of 2 years, going from one tower that would block the 18th Street, the building of the 18th Street pedestrian priority corridor, down to two buildings. That really is a testament to the strength of our policy documents and our sector plans. And it's really very exciting, having worked myself to some extent on the Roslyn sector plan, to see the kind of creativity that can come to bear to realize the visions and goals of the sector plan. And the SPRC members were really quite happy with this Woodland Plaza design. As we know, and I'll just throw this in here, the kinds of plantings that are to be used would take place the choices would be post-approval, but the applicant has been really very willing and able to work with us. And if anyone is interested, I think they would share how those planters would be maintained and planted, and what the changing seasons might show in that area. There was one concern that staff had and that I share. There is an action number 54, I believe, at the end of the Roslyn Sector Plan that calls for the consistency among some elements of design, lighting, street furniture, paving, for the 18th Street corridor, which is meant to go from North Quinn Street all the way to the Esplanade, so that it doesn't look chopped up. It will be delivered really as part of a community benefit by many different proposals and developments. So we, Commissioner Lent, as Mary Claire Burrick of the bid. The Roslyn bid has a streetscape policy that could be used to ensure that there is that kind of continuity, because we really want people to understand it is a throughway, a thoroughfare. Now, by the same token, a lot of people were really quite thrilled with the idea that you would come upon a very interesting and different plaza area. I remember also we talked about having, it's the grade, as you've heard discussed, is somewhat steep, and there are stairs. And so we think there are going to be, at least this is what I think we heard from the comment matrix, there would be runnels, so you could walk your bike all the way down this pathway. We were happy about that. There were generally good, happy comments made about the architecture, and we didn't talk too much about the church superstructure. We might want to do that now. I do remind you that for sustainability, we did hear the green building policy. That does not go into effect until March. The applicant has listed some of the issues that they feel recommend their sustainability vision for the building. I was wondering, with the flat roofs, why we couldn't maybe talk a little bit about solar on top of those roofs. That might be something we want to talk about. I just did want to mention that we did not hear from the Hyatt about their concerns about the amount of density in the SPRC. So this is really it's the first that I've heard about this. While it's true that the zoning creates certain legal obligations binding the county and private interests, There is a county board resolution on the adoption of the 2015 Roslyn Sector Plan, which was adopted July 23rd, 2015, and that's what we go by when we do our SPRC. I won't read it now, but we had a big discussion about this at that time to ensure that the visions and goals of the plan would be adhered to, particularly the heights map and the view corridors. And there are also particular density awards for extraordinary benefits. And I'm not sure that maybe Michael could clarify whether creating the 18th Street Plaza created that ability for an extraordinary benefit. That's a question I'd leave on the table for further discussion. Meanwhile, I gave you a set of discussion topics, and I'm going to turn this back to Commissioner Lantelmi. Perhaps he wants to invite others to put agenda items down that we can discuss. I just would also finally say that at the moment, I plan just to move county manager's recommendation, all three of them, except I think we need a little bit of a discussion about the elevator overruns. I will only make the point that I thought that the county, that the staff argument was that the overruns would obstruct the priority view corridor from the exhibits that we saw. Oh, yes, two more points. The exhibits that we saw from the applicant, it doesn't look like those overruns do obstruct the priority view corridors. They are slices. It's not just any part of the view. And you can see that on page, is it 176? I think I remember that from the old days. I have the Roslyn plan in front of me. So that is something, I mean, I need to hear the good argument about that, and also whether these overruns can be found in another part of the county so I might understand it better. Thing to say, but I'll chime in later and turn this back over to Commissioner Lantelmi.
Thank you, Commissioner Siegel. Before we move further on and asking for any other discussion items, Commissioner Bagley reminds me that she would be giving a report on behalf of the Parks and Recreations Commission. Commissioner Bagley, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, Planning Commissioners did receive a copy of PRC's letter to the County Board from Ms. Johnson this afternoon, but I was asked by them to present a brief summary, which this will be. They're very pleased with the outcome of the planning process, specifically creating a pedestrian-focused 18th Street corridor. Also, the biophilic design components, which they hope will encourage future developers to do same or similar. Also, the Woodland Garden and the finished design of the church rooftop, and that it would be available for civic or neighborhood events. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bagley. Do any of the other commissioners have any discussion topics they would like to add? Okay, hearing none, I think we can now move this item to the commission and start our discussion.
Excuse me, Chair Lantelmi.
I see Commissioner Peterson. Has your hand raised?
No, this is Giselle.
Hi, Giselle.
Mr. Hensley would like to speak for the Arts Commission.
Oh, sure. Please proceed, Mr. Hensley.
Thank you. I'm John Hensley, representing the Public Art Committee. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the Planning Commission about public art. Before I get started, I'd like to applaud the applicant for bringing forward such a high-quality design. It's a very difficult site to work with, and this will be a unique and beneficial design. As for the public art, the PAC sent a letter to the committee, to the Planning Commission today, outlining our concerns, and I hope you each have a chance to review that letter. I'll briefly summarize the letter. Public art is an important urban design element in Roslyn. The sector plan recognizes this multiple times throughout the document. Additionally, the 18th Street corridor that bisects this site specifically calls out for the inclusion of public art. Our letter references the specific sector plan pages related to this site, if you'd like to look at that. The applicant's proposal to provide only $75,000 towards public art is inadequate to provide for a meaningful public art work that reflects the large scale of this project. The letter sent today provides the amounts of other site plans in Roslyn that you can look at. These are provided both through cash contributions and through on-site public art. Public Art Committee and the Arts Commission is therefore requesting that the Planning Commission and the Arts Commission, support our request that the development provide a public art contribution or an on-site public art installation in line with other Roslyn projects of similar scale in order to enhance the 18th Street corridor per the sector plan. Further, we request that the developer work with the county to define a more appropriate public art contribution for the Ames Center project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As I said, let's now move on to discussion. I notice Commissioner Peterson has her hand raised. Recognizing you now.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to add to the agenda the clarification about the maintenance of the landscape areas that the Roslyn Civic Association raised. Thank you.
Actually, why don't we address, okay, Commissioner Steinberger.
I just wanted to make sure that that includes the planters because I had questions about that.
Okay, very good. And let's see, a couple of things. I want to see whether we can get through these fairly quickly in that I think we have consensus. For example, the Skywalks, is that something anybody has any desire to comment on further? Okay, hearing none, I think we can cross that off. The affordable housing, the amount of affordable housing, do we have any comments on that?
Commissioner Lantelmi, I do have a comment about the affordable housing.
Sure.
I just want to point out that during the process panel, which is the process we went through to come up with the Roslyn Sector Plan, we had an extended discussion about on-site affordable housing, and it was pointed out that the land in Roslyn was so expensive that we didn't anticipate getting any on-site. So I just wanted to point out that we do have that now from this developer, and well, I'd like to see a 3-bedroom on-site affordable housing. I don't think we've seen that. It's 1 and 2. We do see some right in Roslyn, and I just think I would point that out. I think that's a good thing.
Thank you, Commissioner Siegel. Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you, Commissioner Lantomi. I did want to sort of follow up on Jane's comment as the architect of the language in the Roslyn Sector Plan that acknowledged the high cost of land and instead encouraged the use of the AHIP contributions in the RMSA. I am ecstatic beyond words to describe the on-site affordable housing staff has been able to get as far as the community benefits package in this proposal, which I'm very excited might mean I actually get to support it entirely. I do actually support them normally because the sector plan does allow for the RMSA language. However, I just did want to commend staff again and the applicant for coming forward with actual on-site units. And to, I believe, the question we heard earlier about the accessibility that I think Terry brought up, they are required to provide the proportional number of units in the affordable housing as far as accessibility. And I'll have staff, if you don't mind, confirm that, Commissioner Lantomi.
Sure. Can staff confirm that?
Hi, this is Michael. We can, and I'm going to ask Melissa Danowski to correct me, but the number of type A units that they have agreed to is 12 total, and that's 6 in each building. and I guess maybe where Melissa should correct me is I actually believe that's a higher proportion than we typically get with projects.
That's correct, Michael.
And so to the comment we heard from one of our public speakers, not only are they affordable, they're also accessible. So again, hats off to staff on this package, and that's all. Thank you, Commissioner Lintomi.
Thank you, Commissioner Hughes. Commissioner Weir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the topic of affordable housing, I want to respond to something that that mention of, if not obliquely, but a topic that we often hear when it comes to on-site affordable housing. And that is this idea that when you add affordable housing, then you add a significant cost burden to the schools. And what we're often told is that to think about the cost burden of students generated by affordable units in terms of the average costs to the per pupil cost for APS times however many students should be generated by this. And I just because this has come up before and because it came up obliquely here, I want to remind commissioners that one, we have a moral obligation to provide housing, to provide education to families that live in Arlington, right? That's just something that we pay for. It's something that we do, right? But two, the appropriate way, and this is something that we're going to be asked to think about a lot in the near future, the appropriate question to ask when it comes to new students in APS is what is the marginal cost of an additional student generated by a new housing unit, right? And for those who aren't familiar with this term of art, right, the marginal cost is the cost added by producing an additional unit or good or service, right? The cost of adding one student to APS. And the marginal cost is almost never the average cost. Anyone who's ever gotten posters printed understands this concept. It costs $1,000 to produce the first 100 posters, but it costs a penny to produce the 101st, right? Obviously, the numbers are different when it comes to students, but the marginal cost of the students that would be added to APS as a result of these on-site affordable units, in addition to being a cost that we gladly bear as a county, is also significantly less than the per pupil cost that a lot of people who are opposed to additional housing in the county have asked us to use in thinking about what are the outside externalities from these kinds of developments. That's the only point I want to make. Otherwise, I associate myself with previous comments. Myself.
Thank you, Commissioner Weir. So, are there any other further comments on affordable housing before we move on? Okay, I'm going to combine a couple of things here. Let's move on to the Woodland Plaza, the 18th Street corridor, and include in that the maintenance of the landscaped areas and the planters on the building itself. So we're really putting in the Woodland Plaza and the biophilic concepts all together in this one discussion right now. I open the floor. Are there any comments on this?
Yes, Mr. Chair, could we get the applicant to explain whether these planters have now gone away? The comment matrix from the public engagement process, I was under the impression that there were many questions asked about who would be responsible for the plantings, the dirt, the watering, and that sort of thing. And I thought we were told that well, this is going to be a rental property. That's what I thought we heard. That the applicant would be managing that process and not just leaving it up to the tenants. So are we not going to have planters in these buildings? Is my question now. I'm very confused.
Sure, I'll raise, Mr. Whitmore, do you have a response to that?
I think I'll let Tim Friemel from Snell. Tim, I don't know if you want to take a crack at that one.
Sure. This is Tim Fremel from Snell. You're talking about the planters that are on the building, correct?
Correct.
So yes, so we will be providing, to the extent we provide planters on the building, we as the owner of the building, will be providing the planter, the dirt, and the plants in the planters. Will be responsible for maintaining the planters and not the residents.
Okay, yeah, the reason we're raising this is a key component of your project that moved to a number of us. We want to be sure that this feature is carried forward, is in fact going to be executed, and will remain a feature of this building. Again, we were all quite taken and excited by it to see it, but we want to make sure it's going to be there.
Right. So we're currently showing planters in the bottom third of the building. As we went through the design, started to talk through the execution of this design with both architecture and the landscape architect. And we, just to be clear, we were very clear through SPRC that these planters were always aspirational, and that we feel like the planters will be most successful on the bottom third of the building where most people will see them from the street. And so that is our current goal, is to provide the planters on the bottom third.
So could I just clarify, Mr. Chair? So the change in your exhibit reflects that, because I noticed there was a change in the exhibit, fewer green areas. Is that correct? That was for Mr. No.
Is that a question for me? Yes, correct.
It's a question for you.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Is there if you don't mind, Mr. Chair, a follow-up for Michael Cullen? Is there a condition in the set of conditions on that point?
That is a great question, and so I want to be clear. There is not a condition, and I think when the applicant talks about these being aspirational, there is a stated intent to install and maintain those, but there is not a willingness to commit to that as a condition for any portion of the building. And right now, the conditions, and this is specifically for the landscape condition, it only applies to the ground level and the lower terrace level plantings.
Okay.
Thank you for the clarification on that. Commissioner Steinberger, I think you were up next.
Yes, and is there a visual that, oh, sorry, I just realized that my camera cover was covered. Apologies. Privacy always. Is there a visual of the planters that the applicant could put up so that I could see that as I'm kind of speaking to it? I think that would sort of help me. I'm troubled that what seems like something the community is really responding to, that is clearly getting a lot of interest and is sort of an innovative response to kind of screening some of the building and being a positive reaction and getting that positive support from the community, is not something the applicant is willing to commit to. I understand that, and I understand, that it's most visually impactful to the bottom third of the building. I'm not saying that I think this needs to be something that goes through all of the floors. I accept that, but I'm troubled. It feels a little bit like a bait and switch, and that troubles me. I don't like the idea that the applicant's saying we could do this great idea, but we're not willing to commit to it. But it certainly makes a much better visual impact when we're looking at images like this. That's an impactful, it creates a greater visual impact to the building. And I think it's something that the community, and certainly something that I, in looking at these slides, responded to very well. So the idea that can't be something that's actually committed to, I find a little troubling when you're also looking for a concession on something like the elevator mechanical space, which, I mean, is that worth planters to you? I don't know. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Steinberger. Commissioner Morton. Go off mute.
Sorry, my camera. There. Thanks, Commissioner Lantelmi. I just wanted to say that I commend the applicant for the way that they have peeled back, in their words, the buildings that I think really do a good job in signaling the entrance to 18th Street and really reinforce the prominence and the accessibility of that. I'd really love for us, I realize that some of this is due to specific site constraints and conditions, but I'd really love us to keep that in mind in future projects. The actual approach to public space and pedestrian connections that often gets overlooked. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Morton. Do we have any other comments on either the 18th Street corridor park or other? Also, there's the maintenance of the landscape. When you raised that, did that, Commissioner Peterson, did that mean on the building itself or on the 18th Street corridor and the landscaping around on the ground level?
I think I was getting to Sarah's point, Commissioner Steinberger's point about I noticed in the staff report, they said that maintenance of the landscaping would be maintained by the applicant for the life of the project. And I just was wondering, and it sounds like they aren't committing to all the greenery that is being depicted in the pictures. So that was the clarification I was looking for. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, do we have any other comments on the park or the maintenance of landscaping around the area? Okay, let's move on. Parking. Do we have any further comments on parking? Okay, we can move on from that then. Do we have any comments on the JIT?
Sorry, Commissioner. Yeah, I did want to say one thing about the parking. One of the sort of throughout the SPRC was to encourage the applicant to create sort of comparables from the Roslyn area itself. We had with the Holiday Inn building a chart that used comparables from Crystal City, which is notoriously overparked. We didn't exactly get a chart that I was sort of looking for. I do think Kedrick will correct me if I'm correct or incorrect. I think that applicant did go back and take a look at what had been the earlier ratios for parking. Central Place was part of it. But I just want to put a marker down for staff going forward, for other buildings that come forward, to really keep track and to let us to try to ratchet down the parking ratios in Roslyn. We're making some progress. It's slow progress. We'd love to see the lower ratios that we saw in our yes, I will. The lower ratios that we saw that we'd like to see recommended by the residential parking study. But I just wanted to sort of put that bug in staff's ears going forward.
Thank you. Commissioner Steinberger.
Thank you. I also wanted to speak on parking and to first to commend the applicant. I am appreciative that the parking ratio, that they've been able to get the ratio a bit lower. I do think that eliminating that level of parking is a benefit. I'm excited about the fact that this is going to have the capability for all electrical vehicle parking. And I did want to ask a clarification on that. Is that all of the parking spots that will have that capability, or was it only some of the spots? I think I got a little confused in your presentation.
Yeah, it's a little unclear. It is enough so that all of the below grade parking spaces could be converted. And the idea there is those above grade parking spaces could be converted to residential in the future. And so if we're in that scenario, then there's the good possibility that electric vehicles are so prevalent that we would convert all of the below grade spaces to EV. But we do have the capacity to do that, which is the big hurdle to do it.
Okay, and what was the split again? How many spaces below ground and how many spaces on the above ground, if you know offhand?
I will need to check that.
There are 222 spaces above grade and 352 below.
Oh, great. Okay, so the majority really could be converted to electric vehicle. I think that's wonderful. I'm also very appreciative of the fact we always have this debate when we talk about, what, and not just in Roslyn, we talk about it in other parts of the county, but with regards to when you do have this above grade parking in certain buildings and what it looks like what are the possibilities to convert that to another use. And I'm very grateful that you're planning accordingly, that would be a possibility for this development. I think that's really smart, and I think that's taking the county in the right direction. So I do want to commend you for that. Point of order or question, is this where we also talk about drop-offs and pickups for Lyft, or do we leave that to later?
We can leave that for a little bit later, right? We'll just focus on the parking.
Right. Okay.
But I also
That was everything I had on parking.
Thank you, Commissioner Steinberger. And I do want to note the Transportation Commission also noted with approval the fact that those above ground parking could be converted to other uses, even though right now the density would not allow that. Laws can be changed, and that could happen in the future. So it is something that the Planning Commission have raised in other projects. Can this be converted at some point? To see it happen here is, I think, again, as Commissioner Steinberger said, moving in the right direction. Commissioner Schroll, I notice your hand is up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question for the applicant, kind of picking up on Commissioner Steinberger's questions about EV charging. Mr. Whitmore, can you clarify what type of future charging it will be? Is this level 1 or level 2?
Kendrick, I can take that. This is Mike Babcock, the sustainability consultant on the project. So the idea behind the resiliency and planning for the project, because the technology in the EV market is changing so rapidly, as we know, right? And we don't want to handcuff a project to a specific style that then gets outdated. I've seen this happen all over the place, level 2, level 3, high speed. The idea behind this project was really to build in that capacity at a significant increase so that you could have essentially 400 parking spaces equivalent for charging, probably to a level 2 level, but it depends on demand. So this idea that it can be this shared resource that can be expanded over time, but also it goes towards the electrification of the facility. So as the market evolves, but also as technologies relative to other sources of electricity, we can use that. So the idea is it's enough capacity, and it's a significant amperage and cost and vaulting and programming that is dedicated to this. A lot of projects will do conduit, right?
That was my next question. So
yeah, that's
why you didn't do the conduit was my next question.
Yeah, it can be tied into existing transformer capacity, so you can only add a handful of them. When you want to do a larger upgrade potential, you need additional amperage and capacity to do that. This project actually is going to the extent of that, so that it can be a full capacity increase, which is well beyond the minimum requirements needed. So it's also meant to be adaptable, right, to grow with the market. So
yeah, so one question on the amperage, and then I'll get back to the conduit. So on the amperage, are you saying that you roughly have about 40 amps per space for future charging? Or is that kind of where you are with it? You kind of referenced level 2, or are you considering that you would just be integrating smart charging and other things in the future if you don't have the necessary amperage on site?
Yeah, I think the exact amperage might be somewhere in the order of magnitude like 4,000 additional amps for the facility. So it's pretty significant, knowing that not all, there is some diversity, as you know, in charging. But also the understanding that the market for the stations and everything changes. Some will have their own that they plug into level 2-esque chargers, right, where you just have the station. But the idea is how that market evolves. This project can expand with it. You're not going to put in all the stations and then the technology changes or people have their own, they can plug in. So the idea is build in the capacity, set up for the conduit to the extent you can, so that it can be expanded over time.
Yeah, fair enough. And then on the conduit, you know, I've seen in rough orders of magnitude of like, if you do the full, you know, EV capable upfront, you can save about $2,200 a space. You know, 4 to 6 times for the, you know, the capacity plus the conduit. Obviously, you're adding the electrical capacity. Kind of wondering if you could kind of explain further why you aren't running the conduit now, given that you sort of know where the, you know, you're not adding the plugs, you're not making it, you know, EV ready, but wondering why you aren't kind of saving some money up front by running conduit raceways and things like that now, if you, when you're in construction and could save, you know, $2,300 a space. Or I guess not all of that. Maybe it's a few $1,000s per space.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're continuing to explore what the balance point is for how much to run through. You know, certainly it's not lost on a sound investment to build in, you know, especially when you're dealing with concrete structure, conduit up front versus say on the perimeter or on the surface of the building. But, you know, I can't speak necessarily the details of how we're running conduit all through the garage and to what extent, but usually the limiting factor with EV ready by far is capacity. So the conduit is a roughly small exercise in cost. Most buildings cannot do this because they just don't have the capacity. So it's dead on arrival. So the addition of conduit could be modified. It also goes to the extent of remaining that one parking area flexible for different uses as well. So I think the key is the capacity and the low letter and being able to provide the power, and then how much conduit, we're still working through that through design.
Okay, thank you. And then I appreciate that, Mr. Babcock. Mr. Cullen, which condition in the site plan requires the applicant to provide what Mr. Babcock just walked through?
Well, requires the provision of EV parking. Is that what you mean, Commissioner Schroll?
Or, you know, all the capacity. So how do we ensure that that what's specified in the app in the staff report about the additional capacity, the 4,000 additional amps, you know, how do we ensure we get that?
So it's not actually specified in the condition. What would be possible is that could be an item that would be achieved through, you know, the standard LEED certification checklist. Like that's an option, basically. And I think that's the takeaway, is that it's optional. So specifically, I mean, there is no specific provision for, you know, EV charging spaces, or even setting aside a percentage of EV ready, which I think is really what you've been speaking to, versus EV capable, which is what Mr. Babcock is speaking to in terms of the capacity.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, so I know that the more recent green building policy gets us closer to this and has that in. And I know this project isn't there. So I know you're not kind of being held to this. It's good that you're providing this. So I'm glad you are providing the capacity. You're right to say that that's usually the biggest hurdle. It's the majority of the money. It's the reason why it doesn't happen. So thank you for doing it. I would encourage you to think about things that might be tougher to do later and that might be more costly to do later, and that or might, you know, cause interruptions in parking for residents and things like that you may not want to do later. And that I keep saying this, but I'll say it again. We are closing in on cost parity of EVs with internal combustion engine vehicles. This building will be here for 40 or 50 years. And, you know, we're getting close to that date where we're going to, you know, the projections are like 2026 for that cost parity. So that's not too far in the future. So thanks again for doing it. And but I'll only speak now tonight. So thanks also for the reduction in parking as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you, Commissioner Schroll. Any other further comments on the parking? And Commissioner Schroll, take your hand down. Given our extensive discussion on the EVs, I think we've actually elided into sustainability. We also touched on biophilia, so why don't we open the discussion up to the sustainability elements of this, which includes the lead. Again, the floor is open. Anybody have any comments for this or questions? Yes, Commissioner Siegel.
Yeah, just a question for the applicant. Was wondering why, with no amenity on the roof and they look flat, you hadn't thought about some solar array up there. That's a question for the applicant.
Yeah, I would say in terms of high-rise, Rosalind, and we look at this particular project as well as, competing priorities on the roof, on the flat roof, service component, stormwater management, exercises. It's all still being explored in terms of what we can actually do. And again, one of the other things is because of the energy density of this building, rooftop solar, you can see they're relatively small roofs relative to the density of this building. So anything we put up there will have a marginal impact in the net reduction of energy, as you know, because it goes to the carbon study as well. When you get to a certain density in a small roof, outside of the value, which is important regarding seeing it and the expression of what that solar says to those that can see it. But that is something, continue to explore and look at as an option. And
just to follow up while I have you on the Zoom lens or the team lens, the language is that the building would be a minimum LEED silver. So we've heard from other developers that as the study goes forward for you're going to be looking at embodied carbon, things like that, might we see some improvement, and that the LEED silver is a floor, not a ceiling, for your aspiration for sustainability?
Yeah, great question. LEED is a framework, right? It's an effective one. We have a sense of what silver might mean and a sense of gold, but there's also the delta between those differences, right? And while silver is the conditional floor, let's say, this project is really pursuing sustainability authentically. That makes sense. You've heard a lot about the theme of resiliency. So to the question on electrification, for example, as that market moves, we have capacity to use some for cars, some for electrification for the building, for example. So the potential, one of the big challenges for high density multifamily is how you do certain technologies. So getting away from or more electrification for the building when the technology becomes available, and or using it for car charging as that market goes. I think also when we look at the newly adopted community energy plan that goes into effect later this year, later this quarter, some things that the project is doing, the embodied carbon, we talk about carbon a lot of times in terms of operational energy use, but the carbon associated with the structure of the building, the materials, the transportation is not insignificant. And that is in the new plan. And this is not a requirement of the project, but this project is exploring that. So the idea of what strategies we can employ structurally to reduce that carbon footprint of the building could have a significant impact in reduction in emissions for this building as well as future buildings in Arlington. While our floor of 15%, our committed level is 15% for ASHRAE, we're certainly striving to improve upon that. We're not resting on that. It obviously needs to make sense for multiple reasons. So we're continuing to push that. And it's highly likely, we're going to do stuff that makes sense for the project, but we certainly recognize silver as the floor. But, what we can do to go beyond that and what makes sense for the project, we would do.
And just one final follow-up question. We discussed this at a prior SPRC, talking about, actually it wasn't at the SPRC, it was the new green building policy, which goes into effect in March, which won't affect you. But we were talking about the need for greater space for bigger electrical conduit for full building electrification. You may have discussed that a little bit with your larger electricity vault in the basement, but if you would just enlighten us a little bit about your thinking about how that requirement for additional space, which is what we heard when we talked about the new green building policy, how you think about that and how that might influence your work going forward.
Yeah, I mean, Kendrick mentioned it. You've heard it a couple times regarding the idea of resiliency and life cycle of building. So, future-proofing the building, as it were. So we've heard the electrification of the car infrastructure, and we know that's happening, and this development will be on board with that. But the fact that we've built in and gone to the expense of building in that extra capacity, not required to, but doing it electively, allows the building to introduce new electrical resources for car charging or for technologies that aren't commercially viable for multifamily buildings at scale right now. So we have capacity to play with, for lack of a better term, that could make the building even more electrified, if that makes sense. The other dynamic I think is interesting is buildings becoming a resource for transportation now, and not just for parking and storing cars, but actually charging them. So that goes beyond the building itself. So I think the key is the capacity increase, the cost, the infrastructure associated with doing that electively allows this building to adapt to future technologies when it comes to electrification.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Siegel. Do we have any other commenters on sustainability by biophilia? Okay. I think what I'd like to do next is move on to the general conformance with the Roslyn Sector Plan, and I will include in that the bicycle issues, the pedestrian circulation issues, the pickup and drop off, pretty much all that ground level type of stuff. And let's hold off on the elevator overruns to our architecture discussion, which will come after this. So I'm opening up. I know we did have at least one question on the pickup and drop off, which Commissioner raised that, can do it again. Commissioner Steinberger.
That might have been me, although I don't believe I was the only one with the question on the pickups and drop-offs. Could you just, and maybe it's not, illustrate where that will be occurring? Because I think there was some confusion on that.
Sure. Can you all see my screen right here? This slide?
Yes.
Shows the location here on Nash of the Pudo pickup drop-off, and there on Fort Myer.
And that's right away, right off the bat, rather than waiting for the tunnel to be eliminated. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, can you say again, Commissioner Lantelmi?
So the pickup and drop off will be right from the start, rather than waiting for the tunnel to be eliminated.
You can see. Yes, you can see the edge of the tunnel right here on this drawing.
Hi, this is Jane with DES. The Nash Street will likely be the permanent pickup and drop off through with the delivery of the building through construction of the tunnel, and then even post-construction, the Fort Myer Drive pickup and drop-off will be impacted by tunnel construction, and then post-tunnel removal may be limited to off-peak times. So that will.
And when we talk, okay, thank you. And we talk about pickup drop-off. Does that include Uber and Lyft, or also the FedEx and UPS?
Yes, we'll work with the applicant to determine the appropriate signage for those public spaces to ensure that, we have sufficient turnover.
How many spaces will be reserved for a pickup drop-off?
I think it's somewhere between 4 and 6. Is that correct? Who's here from Bowman? John or Steve? Can you confirm the number?
Jane, it's Tim. I think it is 6 in total.
Okay, it might be 6 in total, but I think specifically on Nash, I think it's either 4 or 6.
Okay.
And then how many at the other side on Fort Myer Drive when that is available?
We'll have to determine how many will actually ultimately be signed for those specific short-term uses. We don't want to have every public parking space be short-term necessarily. So we'll have to work with the applicant to figure out the balance of pickup drop-off versus, 30-minute versus 1 hour along the frontage to make sure that the uses are the spaces are, complementing the uses. And, if we see a need for more shorter term, we can always change a sign. So that's not a big deal to change, and is not necessarily bound by the site plan. That's something that is right of way, and so we can adjust as we feel the need to.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Steinberger. I actually have a couple questions. Actually, Mr. Woodward, could you put that slide back up? A couple things on pedestrian circulation and the sidewalks. I think it's noteworthy that there will be elimination of that one slip lane at the northern edge of the site, Nash and Fort Myer, and a bump out to shrink the distance for crossing that what now is a very unfriendly intersection that's clearly in advance. I also noticed, though, that you have on this about 6 street trees, and only on the North Nash side. Is it possible, or are you planning to have additional street trees either further up Nash toward the corner, especially now that the bump out's there, and anywhere along Fort Myer, either now or after the tunnel is removed?
I can answer about Fort Myer. So there will be no trees delivered with this project because the curb line that Ames will be installing will actually be the edge of the proposed cycle track. And so we're not going to have them put trees in only for the county to come in later to take them out, probably at a point where they're more mature than we would like for them to be taken out. So we're just going to not have them install them. And then once the frontage is built out post-tunnel construction, then this appropriate street trees will be added as part of the capital project.
Okay, great. So there eventually will be trees along North Nash.
Yes,
just not on Fort Myer.
Yeah. Yes, on Fort Myer. And then if the applicant would like to speak to the North Nash Street.
Yeah, on the North Nash side, Commissioner Lantelmi, it's an issue of the utilities, and there are quite a few moves that we're having to make here that it's kind of hard to reflect on plans of this level of detail. But between the church and where that is today and where it's going to be moved to, there are the utilities in this area of North Nash Street make it impossible to have significant street trees there.
Okay, thank you very much. That answers that. Does anyone have other questions about the general applicability to the sector plan at the ground level? Okay, let's move on then to architecture. And architecture will include the discussion on the elevator overruns. I close the floor open. Comments? Commissioner Morton. You're on mute.
Sorry, there goes my camera. I'm going to join others in applauding you for the quality of the design. I'm really excited for this project to move forward. I am going to ask the obvious question about the discrepancy between the staff's analysis and the applicant's analysis of the view sheds vis-a-vis the elevator overrun. Thanks.
Sure, and I'll obviously let staff speak to their position. I mean, I'll bring this presentation back up here, but I think where the discrepancy lies is between review of these priority corridors versus any other views extending from the observation deck. You know, our read of the sector plan is that those views that are protected specifically are those within the priority view corridors, and that there are a number of techniques used to protect those. There's the peaks and valleys height scheme that's set forward that we comply with, and there is the language that Mr. Cullen referenced in his slide about mitigating or minimizing impacts from penthouses, but those are specific to the priority view, not to the overall views from anywhere in Roslyn.
Can staff weigh in on this, please?
Sure, I can. And actually, if you don't mind, I would like to pull up our slide just for comparison. Can you see that? So I think I agree almost entirely with what Mr. Whitmore was discussing in their presentation. But for the interpretation, and he's correct that it references pages 170 to 175, and that does discuss primarily the priority view corridors. However, this quote on this slide comes from page 180, which is really talking about the peaks, the towers, and the caps, the top of the peaks and valleys that we mentioned, and it's speaking more broadly to overall design of the skyline in Roslyn that is visible everywhere from the observation deck. Absolutely, the focus is on the priority view corridors, and again, we agree the overruns are not within the priority view corridors. Those do inform the massing of the buildings, and the project is compliant with that. Our concern is really with this sort of general language. Specifically that building top should be designed to be complementary and to be thoughtful and to otherwise not adversely impact the vistas. So I think it's a difference of interpretation. The sector plan is not quite as clear as it is on the total building height. But it's just something that I think collectively as staff feel is an issue, and it's been a concern we've raised.
I would just add two things to that. I think you have to read this last sentence in context, that it all relates to the views as described on pages 170 through 175 of the plan. That is absolutely what this refers to: the sculpting, transparency, other design strategies. The second thing I'll say is that, as we noted in our presentation, we're happy to explore any of these strategies that are specifically called for in the sector plan. We can sculpt the penthouses, we can work on transparency, screening, buffering. There are things we can do, and we're happy to work with staff to do that, but we just like the opportunity to get there.
Yeah, I'd like to Commissioner Morton, can I jump in, or are you finished?
Yeah, I was just going to ask whether staff and the applicant had any of those discussions, or some of these more creative or interesting approaches had been discussed. That's all.
I would just add, we've seen briefly, I think, some of the treatments that were shown in the presentation. I wouldn't say they've been discussed at length because we've maintained our interpretation. I think we would certainly be welcome discussion and input at this forum.
Because what I'm wondering about is, am I correct that the 1401 building is entitled, and though it's not built, it is expected to reach the height that it's allowed to go to? And if so, then this is only the only view that the overrun would block would be a little bit of the 1401 building and nothing else. Is that correct? So I'm addressing it to staff. Mr. Collins.
I think I can't verify the rendering. I mean, but there's nothing to indicate that it's erroneous. That appears to be accurate.
And was 1401 entitled before or after the sector plan?
It was entitled before, actually. The Roslyn plan framework was in place.
It was, I think it was entitled during the discussion. And I think in a lot of ways, the sector plan was written around that project because it was in progress. So I think it was before the adoption. And the two did inform each other, the plan and the site plan.
So even though it was before, it's not inconsistent with it?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I guess where I'm coming from, I'm wondering whether some sort of properly done overrun would not do violence to the sector plan given the 1401 buildings entitlement. I'm throwing that out as a speculation. If anybody wants to jump on that as far as further discussion. Yes, Commissioner Siegel.
Yeah, Commissioner Lantelmi, I think that's framing the issue appropriately, and I am looking at page 180. It says distinction. Here's just one distinction from surrounding buildings involve the creative use of materials and building form along with other elements to distinguish a proposed building from its surrounding, provide a richness and layering effect to the Roslyn skyline. It seems to me that could be a good jumping off point that's consistent with the notion of continuing the conversation to find a design solution for the overruns. And I think I'm hearing staff perhaps say that might be something that they could do post-approval.
Yeah, and I think I did remember Ms. Prell mentioning the aesthetic objections to it, which I definitely understand. Having been to the observation deck and looking at the roofs of the buildings around, some of them are actually thoughtfully designed and others are just a mishmash of mechanical parts that were thrown up there. If it could be done in a design-sensitive way, I personally don't see what an objection would be to it. If it is just what some of the other buildings are, just a bunch of big metal boxes thrown up there, then yeah, I would definitely have a problem with that. Commissioner Steinberger, do you have comments?
I do. I understand that in the scheme of sort of what is proposed or what the impact kind of space-wise and in the context of everything else that would be on the roof and the amount of open space that the mechanical penthouse is not an overwhelming footprint. My concern is that given the importance of the views as we're discussing and kind of that view shed, what would be I want to encourage the county to have continued conversations with the developer. I think that's important. But I also want to see what the end result of that would be, to see if there's satisfaction with what the end result is. And this is not going to come back to Planning Commission to have that opportunity. So what would be an avenue for us to have a window into that process? Because I'm dubious.
Yeah, I think, and this is just throwing out ideas, Commissioner Steinberger. I mean, the only way that I see this being a planning commission. I think what you're saying, let me make sure I understand your question first. You're asking how could there be some opportunity for the planning commission to review this again if there were some compromise reached between staff and the applicant to ensure that it's sufficiently still continuing to meet the goals of the sector. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say. I also think that a part of that is that if there's a really great creative solution that comes out of this, we've talked about how much development is going up in Roslyn. I think that we need to have solutions. If a good solution is found, I also want that to be like a teaching moment and something else that can kind of be replicated for other developers too. And I'm just concerned that we're sort of punting something that shouldn't be punted.
Sure. No, I can understand and appreciate that. I think one of the problems lies in the fact that, what we end up showing to the Planning Commission and to the board is not ever the final product. There is always a really significant amount of work that we do with staff behind the scenes as we're finalizing the plans, as we're picking the specific plant species, as we're finalizing the skin of the building. And this I think of as one of those particular items that, if there were leeway to continue having the discussions, that we would then come to it in agreement that staff would be comfortable with. I think one potential solution, Commissioner Steinberger, because I hear your point, is that you don't necessarily want to just say, go ahead, have at it, figure something out, is maybe if the commission were to propose certain criteria by which any kind of a compromise or design solution would be judged and would need to meet, that would allow you all to at least set some guidelines down and ensure that what resulted wasn't, way off from what everyone else is thinking. That would obviate the need, because I do also, respect your time and know that we can't bring every single design element back to a commission. That might be an acceptable compromise to ensure that you all have some control and understanding of what's going to result.
Okay, that's fair. I mean, I think that could be an elegant solution. Candidly, I'm not totally convinced, and I haven't decided how I'm going to vote yet. But
Mr.
I
Collins?
appreciate that in terms of a moving towards a solution. So thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, and I appreciate Commissioner Steinberger's comments, because I didn't state it actually, but one of our concerns is precedent. And this is, while we're looking at the sector plan for design guidance, this is a requested modification for additional penthouse height. And so that there are some concerns as to what future possibilities that could entail. I also want to clarify, certainly we will take a look at whatever recommendations the Planning Commission provides, but it is something that we would need to study. So we can't make any commitments, and we still have, I just want to underscore our concerns, in terms of the sector plan guidance and the design of the building top.
And just to be clear, sorry, I don't think we have any concerns with the need to study it. We understand that we can't just walk in the door with any old thing and have that approved. Our only desire is to remove the site plan condition that essentially shuts down the conversation.
The precedent is something this commission is concerned about. I absolutely agree with Commissioner Steinberger about that. Are there other buildings? How have other buildings dealt with it? This can't be the only building that has an elevator overrun in order to serve the mechanical penthouse. We're not talking about occupied space here. How have other buildings dealt with this issue, or why hasn't it really even come up in other site plans?
Sure.
Do you have any information on that, Mr. Collins?
Well, I'll let the design team, they may have some more insights on that. I will say, and Kendrick alluded to this earlier, we did discuss this with ISD, in fact, with the chief building officer, and we haven't seen this requested modification before, that at least nobody on our team is aware of. We looked into this type of elevator technology, and the understanding we have from ISD is that you can install it different ways, but the reliable way to install it in a building is as they're proposing, where the mechanical equipment is located vertically above the elevator. So it could be that other buildings have designed the elevator overruns so that they could be accommodated within the penthouse height, but that's speculative. So I would turn it over to the design team, for additional clarification.
And I think Robert Sponsler from Shalom Baranis is on and can speak to that.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Robert Sponsler. I'm the design principal for the project. I want to put this discussion into a little bit of context. First, I think in terms of the sort of the scale of the overruns, perhaps there's a way to limit this in terms of precedent to specifically the elevators themselves. One thing about the design that we're that we spent a lot of time on, that we're very proud of, is that we have actually treated our mechanical penthouse floors as building elevational skin. It's a very high quality architecture that's going up to the top of the buildings and enclosing these penthouses. That is not something that you normally see. And so this overrun request is really limited to the elevator shafts themselves, and I think only 2 of the elevator shafts on each tower. It's the equivalent of about 1.5% of each typical floor's floor area that we're talking about here. And so I think it's a very de minimis issue relative to the scale of the project. And the tops of the buildings have been sculpted. You'll notice that we created setbacks on both wings of the project to create an interesting skyline, extended the building facade up to the top. But in terms of the discussion of what type of enclosure and cladding we would use, I personally believe that it should be just a very elegant and quiet treatment of those volumes that relates to the rest of the building design, as opposed to something completely different and unique. We showed the page a little bit earlier about the material samples that we would consider putting up there. We would welcome discussion with staff on the appropriate treatment. And to the question about, have you seen this on other projects and what do other people do? This height of 310 feet is really something that separates the elevator types and requires this additional overrun. Buildings that are about 250 feet in height can use the other elevator technology, and they can fit their overruns within the mechanical penthouses. But the fact is that the penthouse limit of 23 feet is about 12 feet short of covering the elevators themselves, and that's why we've asked for it. In other jurisdictions and other parts of the region, those limits of 23 feet do not apply to tall buildings like this. So that's why you're seeing this issue. I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you very much. So it's really an artifact. As we go taller, this is an issue we'll be running into.
Correct.
More and more. Given the current state of elevator technology. Commissioner Weir.
That's correct, yeah.
I might be missing something, and I apologize if this has been covered either tonight or previous meetings, but why, I work at a downtown 12-story building. Obviously not right now, but nominally do. And we're on the 12th floor, and the building engineers and technicians have to walk through our suite all the time because the elevator goes to our floor, and to access the mechanical suite, they have to take the elevator to our suite and then walk through 2 steps, and have to take steps to the mechanical suite. Maybe it's just as simple as it's grandfathered into whatever ADA provisions exist today, but what I don't understand is why the overrun is necessary to access. Why is it necessary to have elevator service to the mechanical suite as opposed to stair service?
So most of the equipment in the building is in a 23-foot tall floor above the tallest occupied floor in the building. And that's quite a long distance to have to go if you're carrying equipment upstairs. So the ideal way to design the building for future maintenance and preservation, something we all care very deeply about, is to allow that elevator to service all of that equipment. I'm sorry, it's not 23 feet, it's about 13 or 14 feet of height that our top floor is. So to avoid having to take those stairs up, which is a fallback, and that's what we would have to do if we aren't able to service the floor. We believe that a more practical solution is this, minimal overrun limited to just 2 of the elevators. So we're only taking up 2 elevators in each tower for redundancy, proposing to take up 2 elevators in each tower for redundancy to service this mechanical floor, which is where all of the building's main mechanical systems are housed and need to be maintained regularly. So it's really driven by a very practical maintenance concern and is a very, I think, de minimis issue in terms of visibility.
Can I just add on that point? Rather than always just a maintenance guy walking up the stairs carrying a bucket of tools, there may be times when we actually need to get large pieces of equipment to that level. And if this elevator doesn't service that level, we would potentially have to hoist that material from the street with a crane.
I appreciate those clarifications. Thank you. And I guess the only other question I have about it is why not just what? I guess this has been asked, but why isn't the solution just to make the overrun, to solve the overrun as a design issue? As to make it something that's worth looking at and worth seeing, as opposed to just an obstacle. But that's been addressed, so I guess I just am associating the comment. That's all I've got. I'm sorry.
Okay. Do you have any further comments? Okay, having discussed that, let's see what else is here. Any other architecture comments on the church, on the buildings themselves? I personally think that this is pretty high quality architecture. I've been very, from the start, I agree with the comments that you have been making about the applicant's been making about the project. It is pretty high quality, consistent, and well thought through. It should be in addition to what too often has been banal architecture in Roslyn. This helps reverse that, I think. Commissioner Steinberger.
I did really want to commend the architecture in particular for the church. I find that very appealing, and I think that's very expertly kind of conceived. So I'm excited about that piece of it for sure. And I'm going to make a further plug that the planters really do add something very vibrant to the building and something that I think the applicant should be committing to. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Steinberger. I guess we can move on from architecture at this point. Do we have any further comments on the Public Arts Committee and its request for additional arts contribution? Commissioner Morton, your hand is up.
Yeah, sorry, I'm having trouble. There we go, with my camera. I just wanted to associate myself with Mr. Henley's comments. I appreciate the fact that he's brought up several times in our planning documents, the Realized Roslyn Plan, where public art is called out as playing a really prominent role, and it has played a really prominent role in shaping and re-envisioning the character of Roslyn. I worry, since we're talking about precedent of this minimum contribution compared to those other projects that he compiled, which is really much less. And I worry that precedent may impede our ability to further realize these ambitious plans that have been laid out carefully that continue to incorporate public art into the development and re-envisioning of the district.
Thank you, Commissioner Morton. Commissioner Gearin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am curious about this issue. We don't often get to spend a lot of time discussing public art, and I'm always grateful when Mr. Hensley spends so much time on this with us because it's such a small part of the SPRC discussion. But I would like to know how, maybe from staff's perspective, we do go about making this assessment that some projects do need to make a greater contribution. Could we get a little guidance on that?
Sure. I can.
Thank you.
I can start, and I'll add. We've got Aaron Schreiber here who can go into a little bit more detail if necessary on the community benefits package. But I just would say basically, or as simply, the public art contribution is very similar to the affordable housing contribution, where we have a base site plan contribution that is required for almost all site plan projects. And then there is a provision for additional density for additional public art contribution. And I think that's what you're seeing with those other projects referenced. And I would then simply add that, with this particular project, there is a number of sector plan priorities that we're trying to balance and that can really only be delivered with this project, such as the 18th Street corridor, or the contribution that would really go to facilitate or could facilitate the Fort Myer Tunnel project, as well as the substantial affordable housing contribution in terms of on-site units.
So thank you, Mr. Cullen. So if I understand that right, then there's been some determination that if we didn't need contributions made to some of these other components of the Roslyn Sector Plan, of which this is a big project in that area, we might in fact see a greater contribution in public art.
That's correct. I mean, the contribution that's in the conditions now is that's part of the set of standard conditions that is achieving the base sector plan FAR. Whereas, to go above that, you could provide a contribution, but we're achieving that through other means.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Siegel.
Thank you, Commissioner Weir. I really do appreciate Mr. Hensley's intervention here, and I'm a bit torn about the validity of a request for additional consideration for a project like this. But on the other hand, I so very much like the architecture, the way the architecture works with the Roslyn Steps, the plaza, as an area of repose and urban respite. As you're working your way through Roslyn from the hopefully full pedestrian corridor that's such a keystone for the whole plan. This has got to be the paucity of my own imagination, but I'm trying to imagine what more could be done, because I just love the idea of the respite, and that leads me to wonder whether the biophilic treatment could be, one could think a little bit more about plantings, the seasonal changes, without taking away from the what I think could be a real area of urban respite. I'm not sure I've explained that very well, but so I'm sort of, I just wanted to lay out that I feel somewhat torn about this. I also, just to put a pin in this, Commissioner Lantelmi, this will be a publicly, and I'm shocked that I didn't think about asking this until now, and this is, I guess, for staff. Will this be a publicly eased, privately maintained space, the plaza?
Yes, there will be a public access easement that will be granted.
Okay. With maintenance to be done by the applicant.
That's correct. And as a reminder, that the benefit for additional density is both construction and ongoing maintenance of this space.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Siegel. Do we have any other discussion on public art? Okay, with that, I think that we have wrapped up discussion. Does anybody have any final comments, questions that they would like to make before we move on to motions? Okay, Commissioner Siegel, could you start laying out the three motions that you have? And if there are any other motions, we'll hear those after Commissioner Siegel lays out the three that she was proposing in her memo.
Right. I'm pulling it up. I had intended to move a staff report, except I wanted, so we're going to do this one at a time, right? We're going to start with the rezoning. Yes. Okay, yes. So why don't I just go ahead with move the Planning Commission, recommend the county board, there's good language here, adopt the attached ordinance to rezone from CO mixed use district to CO Roslyn Mixed Use Roslyn District for the property known as 1820 and 1830 Fort Myer Drive, RPC number 16-036-002, 004, and 006.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
That's Commissioner Schroll?
Yes.
Thank you. Do we need to speak to your motion? Do we have any discussion?
I think I don't have any additional comments to make. I'll just at this point, well, I'll make that comment at site plan when I talk about site plan. But at this point, no. I think we had a very full discussion at SPRC and a good discussion here at Planning Commission. And so I think this motion recommends itself, I guess I would say.
Okay, thank you. I guess we can move ahead to a vote for this on this motion. I'll start with Commissioner Weir. Unmute.
Aye.
Commissioner Siegel.
Aye.
Commissioner Schroll.
Aye.
Commissioner Hughes.
Aye.
Commissioner Gearin.
Aye.
Commissioner Morton.
Aye.
Commissioner Patel.
Aye.
Commissioner Steinberger.
Aye.
Commissioner Bagley.
Aye.
Commissioner Peterson.
Aye.
Commissioner Sarli is abstaining. He's recused. And I will vote I would vote aye myself. Good. Commissioner Siegel, you have another motion?
I do. I move Planning Commission recommend the county board adopt the attached ordinance, the ordinance attached to the staff memorandum of December 30th, 2020 for to site plan number 1 for a new 740 unit multi-family residential development consisting of 2 building towers with approximately 10,146 square feet of retail, 9,561 square feet of commercial office or retail flex space, approximately 24,488 square feet associated with proposed church and fueling station space, and up to 225 residential units proposed for interim hotel use for a limited period, and modifications of use regulations to include additional density exclusions, required parking, compact parking percentage, loading requirements, and other modifications as necessary to achieve the proposed development plan. I'm going to leave that out for now. I think we may entertain some motions. located at 1820. And what I'm leaving out is the overruns. 1820 and 1830 Fort Myer Drive, RPC 16-036, 002, 004, and 006, subject to the conditions of the attached ordinance.
Do we have a second?
Is this the appropriate time to make a modification motion to the Commissioner Siegel's motion?
I'm going to ask our informal parliamentarian, Commissioner Schroll.
You need a second, Mr. Chair, before we can entertain any motions.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Commissioner Morton, second. Okay, Commissioner Steinberger, do you need to make a separate motion, amendment?
Could I just clarify, speak to motion before
Sure.
Commissioner? Yeah. Yes, I left that out specifically because we had an extensive discussion about the overruns, and I think we want to encourage some more work there, but I'm interested to see what Commissioner Steinberger has to say about that. I did just want to say that I do think note a great deal of pleasure in the architecture, the plaza, the ability of the responsiveness of the applicant. It really is a lovely project. I know we have a little bit more work to do on it, but so those are really my comments.
Commissioner Steinberger, you have a motion.
Yes. So I hate to disappoint Commissioner Siegel, but the motion I was actually going to initially make was going to be to add a site plan condition that would require the discussed planters on the bottom third of the building and to be maintained by the developer.
Okay.
I'm perfectly happy to engage in a conversation as to initial ideas for what could be done with the, sorry, my camera's not on, I'll put that on. I'm perfectly happy to engage in a conversation as to what my ideas at this point of what I think could be done with the mechanical elevator. But the initial amendment that I'm prepared to offer is to add a supplemental site plan condition with regards to the planters.
Okay, why don't we then move ahead? So that way, Commissioner Steinberger, can you give us the language that you would like to use and see if we can get a second?
Yes, I move that the motion before the commission be amended to include a site plan condition by which the developer will commit to including the planters, the proposed planters on at least the bottom third of the proposed design.
Second, Elizabeth Guerin.
Yes, thank you. Would you like to speak to your motion, Commissioner?
I think I've done that a couple times tonight. I think they certainly add something aesthetically to the building. They have been well received by the community, and I think that it is appropriate at this point that the developer live up to their beautiful design images that we've seen, and this is one way to do that.
Commissioner Hughes?
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm trying to make my video pop on. Sorry, Jim. Thank you, Commissioner Lantomi. To Commissioner Steinberger and her motion, I thought earlier this evening your intentions were possibly to negotiate at the table, I think is what Commissioner Cole used to refer to it, which would be by placing our endorsement of the conditional acceptance of the planters as acceptance of the height. Is that this motion doesn't achieve that goal? Is that your intention, or are you?
I've decided to go more carrot than stick. I'm perfectly willing to horse trade, but at this point, I think the developer should make a show of good faith that they will accept my initial motion and understand that there's a broader conversation that needs to be had about the mechanical elevator unit.
Do note there is a staff condition at the moment that would preclude the mechanical elevator.
Do I what? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Do note that there's a current staff condition that would preclude the elevator.
I do understand that, and I don't think we're done with that topic. I think that's going to be discussed. The staff and the applicant seem willing to consider what would be an appropriate framework by which to make that mechanical elevator more palatable. And I have ideas on that. I'm certainly open to other commissioners making that motion.
You've made your motion, so it's with us now. But I do believe, Commissioner Steinberger, I would support a trade there to further commitment, both conditional on allowing the applicant to make their case for the elevator at staff level post approval, and for ensuring the any approval would be contingent upon the planters being in place. But thank you.
That's fine. If that's how other, if that is the feeling of other commissioners as well, I'm very willing to amend my motion. I'm willing to amend my amending motion to Commissioner Siegel's motion to make that a more explicit relationship in terms of what one would be proposed to trade for the other. Perfectly happy to do so.
Okay, Commissioner Steinberger's motion's on the table. I'm actually thinking of, I'm going to throw out here a motion which could be complementary rather than replacing yours, would be an additional one that might address this issue, and I'm definitely not wedded to any of the language here that I'm going to raise. My motion is I move that the Planning Commission recommend that staff and applicant continue discussions to find a design solution to the 12-foot elevator overrun that does not visually exceed the height of the 1401 building as entitled or otherwise violate the spirit of the Roslyn Sector Plan.
So,
does anybody quite understand that?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Commissioner Schroll.
Turn my video on here. I think we, since your motion was not necessarily made in the nature of the substitute to Commissioner
not a substitute.
Steinberger's, I think we can return to that issue or see whether or not Commissioner Steinberger had an intention of, which I think she might have, of amending her motion, which is on the floor currently. So we need to dispose of Commissioner Steinberger's motion, I guess, is the thrust of it before we.
Do we have to do that before we hear from the applicant who's turned on his video and indicated that he would like to say something?
So no, I mean, I think we can hear from Mr. Whitmore, but I would just advise the chairman that if we don't kind of do something that makes your motion moot in some way, then we should return to your motion after we dispose of Commissioner Steinberger's.
No, I actually was surprised, Commissioner Schroll. I thought you were going to speak up even faster. You're usually so quick to tell us when we violated parliamentary procedure, even
exactly
in appearance. I couldn't believe that Commissioner Chair Lantelmi got away with giving a potentially second motion when mine hadn't been voted on yet. But I was willing to let it go forward.
I was a little slow on getting the microphone and video up there, but I'll turn it over to Mr. Whitmore, I guess, Mr. Chairman, if that's okay.
Yes, Mr. Whitmore, you're recognized.
I appreciate it, and I realize I'm fully breaking parliamentary procedure by speaking during your motion, so thank you. I did want to just clarify one thing with respect to the plantings, because I do think there was some confusion during the discussion, and I want to make sure that we're all making and accepting the motions with all the right information. Commissioner Steinberger, to the points you made earlier, when we talked about the plantings being aspirational and not wanting to have a site plan condition related to it, that is more a function of survivability than anything. And I'm not an arborist, but what I understand is that as we move up the building, even on this lower third of the building, there is concern about how these plants are going to fare and how well they're going to survive. Our concern is that if there's a site plan condition mandating these plants stay in place, you have the risk that plants dying or even a small number of plants dying or just not being able to survive up there violates the site plan conditions. And while the county, likely is not going to come and drop a hammer on somebody because a plant didn't survive, we do have a number of obligations to lenders where we represent that the project will be in compliance with all site plan conditions. And so our concern is with a footfall to something like this. So I just wanted to make that clear before this gets finalized, that our concern is with the concept that there could be some lack of survivability through kind of just no fault of the applicant, just the way things work out for plants sometimes, and that we wouldn't want to be in a site plan violation of a site plan condition as a result of that. So I wanted to just make that clear before you all finished up the motions. Thank you.
May I respond?
Yes, yes, please, Commissioner Steinberger.
So I appreciate that, and you're speaking to a woman who once, killed not one but two cacti. So I do understand that plants are living things, and there's living things have a life cycle. That said, I'm willing to amend my motion to establish that a certain percentage of plants, or however, would need to be maintained at any given time if you're really concerned that this is something that could cost you the good faith nature of your compliance with the site plan in terms of the development. If we're talking about maybe it's a commitment of at a minimum 25 to 30%, the set of the bottom third, it would be the bottom quarter to 30%, something like that. I'm willing to look at that. I'm not compelled that it is such an insurmountable burden that some plants might die that you would be out of compliance with your site plan, that I'm willing to take this off the table on my own. My fellow commissioners can vote this down if they find that compelling. I do not personally.
Could it be best efforts language, something like that?
I'm open to that language as well, yes.
Okay, does anybody have any other possible amendment? Oh, Commissioner Siegel, then Commissioner Hughes.
Can we get the language of the, from Commissioner Steinberger? Can we get that language again?
Sure. Mr. Steinberger?
Yes, what I had said, and again, I'm open to amending this, is that motion to add a site plan condition which would require developer to maintain planters as proposed over the bottom 1/3 of the building.
I just want to, I'll just jump in and say, I would support this only if it had a best efforts in deference to the concern that the applicant not be out of compliance. Although I do know we have had changes in our tree replacement policy that have beefed that up. I mean, I think it used to be that the maintenance requirements for trees were not as stringent as they become. And so if it's simply a condition that requires planting and no further action or requirement for bonding or anything like that, I don't see how that would be a problem. But I would support this if there were a best efforts language supplied.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Siegel. Commissioner Schroll.
Mr. Commissioner Lantomi.
Oh, Commissioner, I didn't see your hand up.
I dropped. I was next. Sorry. Thank you. To Jane's point, I think that Commissioner Steinberger's language would allow for staff to later negotiate the exact language with the applicant for inclusion of such a best effort to acknowledge those concerns. I will say in the latest Crystal City building at JBG, there's no such concerns all the way up to the top of the building in that case. That was not conditioned, though, to a point to the applicant. But I do think I will support Commissioner Steinberger's language as proposed, even without the condition, noting that the public record will show in our letter that my support of it is a function of expressing that an aspirational goal for an applicant can become a realized goal when an aspirational request can also become a realized request. And so with that, I believe that the two are inextricably linked. So with that, thank you, Commissioner Lantomi.
Thank you, Commissioner Hughes. Now, Commissioner Schroll.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly support what Commissioner Hughes said. The applicant can still always work with staff on administrative changes and does so every site plan, just about. And so could certainly do so here in the event that, plans didn't survive, they could certainly come back with an administrative change. We don't want to punish the applicant for doing something like this. And I don't think, I agree with Commissioner Hughes that I don't think Commissioner Steinberger's motion needs to be amended to afford the applicant that ability. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, then, Commissioner Sue, do you have one more comment before we wrap this up? Your hand is up. You're on mute. Okay, it's down. Okay, I guess we can now move to a vote on Commissioner Steinberger's motion. And Commissioner Weir. Off mute.
My apologies, I vote aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Siegel.
I've been convinced by the comments of the last two commissioners, so I'll support the motion with an aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Sherrill. You're on mute.
Aye.
Commissioner Hughes.
Aye.
Commissioner Guerin.
Aye.
Commissioner Morton.
Aye.
Commissioner Patel.
Aye.
Commissioner Steinberger.
Aye.
Commissioner Bagley.
Aye.
Commissioner Peterson.
Aye.
Commissioner Sarley is recused, and I too will vote aye. Commissioner Lantelmi. The motion passes. Okay, Commissioner. Okay, we have now. I can now make my motion, and I will make it again. I'll read through it, and it is. I move that the Planning Commission recommend that staff and applicant continue discussions to find a design solution to the 12-foot elevator overrun that does not visually exceed the height of the 1401 building as entitled, or otherwise violate the spirit of the Roslyn Sector Plan. Do we have any second for this?
I'll second your motion. This is Jane Siegel.
Okay, Commissioner Siegel has seconded. Discussion. I'm raising this because I feel that it would be fruitful to have this is more of a sense of the commission motion, that to have staff and the applicant see if they can work out a mutually acceptable solution for this. I think we understand the need for the technical need for the elevator to go as high as it does, and the cost for not doing that would be potential to lose a floor. We have a lot of housing that we need here, especially affordable housing, and I think that this is to encourage a negotiated solution. Commissioner Hughes, I think you were first.
Thank you, Commissioner Lantomi. I think along with Commissioner Schroll, Commissioner Siegel, I'm like the only three remaining commissioners who were here during the Roslyn Sector Plan adoption. And the view back onto Arlington, not just towards the city, was one of areas that I know Commissioner Cole mentioned it to us as probably the most underrepresented portion of it. I do think staff is correct on the precedent. We knew at the adoption of the sector plan that every single building was going to try to get every single square inch of effort and height. And so I think that for the applicant to move forward, it does need to be a design that truly is complementary and perhaps even aesthetically more pleasing. So with that, Commissioner Lantomi, I do intend to support your motion. I do think staff is well represented in holding the line as best they can. I do think that the intent, though, is being well managed by the applicant. And more importantly for us all to consider in the long run is that although the observation deck is not a commercial entity now, maybe it becomes one in the future, or maybe it doesn't. And so do we really want to hold our line on a currently non-operating and closed before the pandemic commercial entity that's currently just an event space up there? So that's all I have to say, but thank you, Commissioner Lantomi.
Thank you, Commissioner Hughes. Commissioner Morton.
Thank you. I will be supporting the motion. I think, and in part, just as you've said very articulately, because it allows for a negotiated discussion, which I think could result in something fruitful and interesting. I was a little confused by your language. I think you said something like it won't visually exceed 1401, and I don't know, when we're talking about this stuff, the definitions seem really important. Can you repeat what you were saying?
Yes, the language was to find a design solution to the 12-foot elevator overrun that does not visually exceed the height of the 1401 building as entitled or otherwise violate the spirit of the RSP.
And apologies if this is a silly question. Visually exceed means what exactly?
What I'm trying to do is referring back to the renderings we were seeing, and that from the height of the building, that looking from the, I guess it's from the observation deck, it would not be any higher than what looking to the west would be no higher. It would not go above what you can see of the 1401 building.
I see. Okay. So you're not talking about height, you're talking about continuing to talk about the view shed and the...
Right, the view shed.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'm sure that could be discussed between the applicant and staff. So I'll support. I'm just still a little confused by the precision of that language. So thanks.
Yeah, and I'm certainly willing to take unanimous consent to change the language to something that is more properly descriptive of what we're trying to get at. Commissioner Schroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to clarify with you about the specificity of the overrun, because the staff report denotes a 13-foot overrun, and your motion is a 12-foot overrun. So I want to make sure we can clarify with Mr. Cullen what the overrun is.
Mr. Cullen, can you give us some guidance?
That's correct. It is 13 feet. So the total is 36. If I could take the opportunity just to add one sort of clarifying question on the motion. I don't know if that's appropriate or not, but I understand, I think, what you're saying, specifically since you said what you see, but just want to be clear that building height is separate from penthouse height, and that penthouse height is a projection above. So you would want to be clear about building height versus penthouse height. So that, for example, the building height for the South Tower is 310 feet. The total building height is 333 feet if you count the projection.
I was really more referring to the 1401 building. So should that be the penthouse height of the 1401 building? Because I'm just thinking with the elevator, it's simply the 12-foot elevator overrun. We're not getting into
that's correct.
Okay, so it should be that does not exceed the 13-foot elevator overrun that does not visually exceed the penthouse height of the 1401 building as entitled.
Correct.
Okay. Could I ask for unanimous consent to make that change to the motion? Would that be a correct move, Mr. Schroll?
Yes, I would I would ask for unanimous consent to amend your language about 1401, but also the correct
13 foot.
the 13 foot.
I have a question that's a clarification. It's not, I'm not saying yay or nay to the universal unanimous consent. What does visually exceed? Is there an understood definition to that?
I was actually using that to refer back to the renderings we were shown of how the view from the observation deck, a 13-foot overrun would not exceed would not be higher than the 1401 building's height.
So I understand why we're making that comparison, and I think that's a smart way to go with, based on the data points we've sort of received from the applicant. My concern, I guess, is a little bit twofold. One, 1401 doesn't exist, and we're not sure when it will exist. And when it comes to kind of measuring that visual excess or what looks like that, I don't know how, and maybe this is a technical question, how would that be measured? Can it be measured? I don't know the answer.
It should be able to, because that's why I'm saying 1401 building as entitled, because you're right, it does not exist. But there is an entitlement there, which does have a specific height to it beyond the mechanicals, the penthouse, and whatever else. So we could be able, that's the, thank you, Mr. Whitmore. That shows pretty much what I'm referring to.
Okay, and understood. I'm inclined to support your motion and to support the motion. The unanimous consent to the substitution to substitute your motion. I guess on the last image, less on this screen, it looked to me like, and maybe it's just because this is a rendering, not the actual building, obviously. Like the proposed elevator run did appear to me to visually exceed the proposed penthouse for the mechanical structure on 1401. Is that just me?
I don't know. I can't see it right now.
Neither can I. But
it's up here. I think it depends somewhat on the angle. I mean, we in this case, right on this slide, are looking at the priority view corridor, right? We're looking at that exact view, and that is where there isn't any projection above 1401. When we look at it from some of the other angles, because remember, right, we've got a 360-degree view and a really wide range of view from the observation deck. When we go to some of the other angles, at that point, there are some areas where the projection pops up when you're looking directly west towards the Ames Center site. There is some projection above here, I think. I'll ask any of the architects to confirm if I've got that wrong, but there is some projection here that goes slightly above 1401. So it's difficult because it depends on your vantage point, because remember, not only do we have multiple views, but the observation deck is a long, a 360 walk around. So you can take views from a number of different locations.
Yeah, Kedrick, this is Robert again. Just to jump in, 1401 also has a sloping roof profile, which makes that difficult to measure.
I see. Okay.
I'm wondering if maybe we just need to, so to speak, bite the bullet and make the motion not tying it to 1401.
Okay, so it would read then, I move that the Planning Commission recommend that staff and applicant continue discussions to find a design solution to the 13-foot elevator overrun that does not otherwise violate the spirit of the Roslyn Sector Plan.
Second.
I think, did I not second that? I would say I would.
Yeah, it's seconded. We're just looking at some language that people might, that if we, by unanimous consent, would go along with the amendment. Okay.
So for clarity, Mr. Chairman, I would, if you're moving the additional language, I would just withdraw your previous language from the floor.
And then start again.
Well, yeah, I would, no, just just withdraw your previous language that was seconded by Commissioner Siegel. She can second what you just moved, but you had something else on the floor that you need to withdraw with her consent.
I would give my consent for that.
Thank you, Commissioner Siegel. Okay, so let's try this now.
Okay.
Okay, here's my amendment. I move that the Planning Commission recommend that staff and applicant continue discussions to find a design solution to the 13-foot elevator overrun that otherwise does not violate the spirit of the Roslyn Sector Plan.
On page 180, which is where that
page 180.
It's where that is. That's what staff
on page 180.
So you may want to throw that in.
Okay, let me read one more time. I move that the Planning Commission recommend that staff and applicant continue discussions to find a design solution to the 13-foot elevator overrun that does not otherwise violate the spirit of the Roslyn Sector Plan on page 180.
Stephen, if you want to second it, go for it.
You can do it, Jane. It's fine. I'll second it.
I'm sorry. I don't want to jump in here late, but can we add language that says if there are any solutions? Because that seems to indicate that they have to find a solution.
I think staff's position, Commissioner Patel, would be that there are no solutions, that it exceeds the required height.
Yes, discussion to find a solution. I think that doesn't preclude that they can't find one. It's just to have discussions. It doesn't assume an outcome.
Well, I mean, I would feel, I guess I kind of go with this precision. I mean, if there are any, this is directing them to find a solution. And if staff doesn't believe that there is a solution, they're going to have to work together to determine whether that's in fact the case.
So do you have a suggestion, Commissioner
I would
Patel?
just say to find a solution, comma, if any, comma.
If any. Comma, okay. So we would have it read, I move that the Planning Commission recommend that staff and applicant continue discussions to find a design solution, if any, to the 13-foot elevator overrun that does not otherwise violate the spirit of the Roslyn Sector Plan on page 180.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, now that we have language, do we have a second?
Mr. Chairman.
Okay. The second, Commissioner Schroll is weighing in here.
All right, I just wanted to make sure that was being moved or you were asking for unanimous consent. So you got Commissioner Steinberger, so that's okay.
Okay. We have three hands up. Commissioners Hughes, Steinberger, and Patel. Do you want to talk before or after we have you get this motion going?
I think the motion's going, Jim, so let's talk now.
Okay. Commissioner Hughes.
I just wanted to inform my fellow commissioners, the priority view shed, the heights, the renderings, we could spend several days on them and the technicalities of them, and we could have academic conversations on them. I think what's more important tonight is to listen to the intent of Commissioner Lantomi, Commissioner, who is our motion maker, Commissioner Steinberger, who's spoken, and Commissioner Siegel. And if you feel that the intent is not what represents you, just say it now, even if you do support, so that we can have that motion language go forward for board members. As I think staff and the applicant now know where we stand, because trying to get technical with this, speaking from experience, I think this was our 1 a.m. meeting, and I don't really want to get into that with all of you all. So that's all.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Commissioner Hughes. Commissioner Patel.
I agree with everything that Commissioner Hughes says, but I would just look at it from the other angle and say that for me, if that language, if any, were not in it, I would have voted no, because I would have given deference to staff's recommendation. So for me, that language was important, and for all of the reasons that Commissioner Hughes just articulated.
Okay, and there, Commissioner Steinberger.
Thank you. I think that the stands now with the input from Commissioner Lantomi, Commissioner Patel, and Tech Commissioner Me is better than it was before, and I think it gives a path forward for staff and the applicant to come to what I hope is a creative and aesthetically pleasing solution to what I think is a legitimate problem, but not one that is unsolvable, I hope. I would also like to say that earlier in the meeting, and it feels like a long time ago because it was a long time ago, we heard about whether there was enough commitment to public art with this project and whether the contribution was sufficient and what public art would be on site. I would like to suggest, and I'm not saying this needs to be in the motion, I'm simply putting my 2 cents out there for the applicant to hear and staff, that this might be an opportunity for the applicant to increase their public art experience or contribution, as it were, in terms of not financially necessarily, but in terms of actual output in the screening design that ultimately is perhaps reflected in the mechanical penthouse. So that's my marker. I'm putting it down. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Steinberger. Commissioner Schroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will not be supporting this motion. I do think that many of you have helped improve it, but having kind of lived through the Roslyn sector plan update, I know how much these view sheds and height were a major point of contention and were hard fought over for years. I can understand that the applicant is arguing that it's not above the height, and some of these view sheds in their view may not be blocked. I, for one, though, am not comfortable with the precedent it sets that we would be kind of relitigating or perhaps relitigating this with each subsequent site plan in Roslyn. So for that reason, I'm going to be voting no.
Thank you, Commissioner Schroll. Mr. Steinberg, your hand is still up. Okay, I think we're ready for a vote now on the amended, on my motion. Let me put my paper here so I can mark this down. Commissioner Weir.
Aye.
Commissioner Siegel.
Aye.
Commissioner Schroll.
No.
Commissioner Hughes.
Aye.
Commissioner Gearon.
No.
Commissioner Morton.
Aye.
Commissioner Patel.
No.
Commissioner Steinberger.
Aye.
Commissioner Bagley.
Aye.
Commissioner Peterson.
No.
Commissioner Sarli is recused, and I'm voting aye. The motion passes. Okay, Commissioner Siegel, we have a third motion out, don't we? That you have to make?
We do.
Actually, have we voted on the second one?
Yes, indeed.
We have not yet voted on the second one.
Yep. We want to vote for the second motion as amended.
Right, okay. Start from the top. Commissioner Weir. Try mute.
Aye.
Commissioner Siegel.
Aye.
Commissioner Schroll.
Aye.
Commissioner Hughes.
Aye.
Commissioner Gearon.
Aye.
Commissioner Morton.
Aye.
Commissioner Patel.
Aye.
Commissioner Steinberger.
Aye.
Commissioner Bagley.
Aye.
Commissioner Peterson.
Aye.
Commissioner Sarli is recused, and I vote, Commissioner Lantelmi votes aye. Okay, Commissioner Siegel, you have a third motion.
I do, except I think I have a question for staff. My understanding from past experience on commission is that when there is a vacation, the obligation of the commission is to make a finding that the vacation is consistent with the Arlington Comprehensive Plan. So that's the way I'm going to couch this motion.
That is correct.
Okay, it's not quite written that way, so I'll just change it.
Commissioner Siegel, do you have the staff report for the vacation?
I have the motion. The motion is the county manager recommendation itself is to enact the attached ordinance of a vacation to vacate. But I'm saying what the commission's obligation is to make a finding that the vacation, namely a portion of, and I'll keep reading it, a portion of a public street and utilities easement running north from Wilson Boulevard parallel to the west side of North Fort Myer Drive, RPC 16-36002, and number 2, portions of a public street and utilities easement running north from Wilson Boulevard parallel to the west side of North Fort Myer Drive, RPC 16-36-002, and 3, portion of a public street and utilities easement running north from, it's hard to read, Wilson Boulevard parallel to the west side of North Fort Myer Drive, RPC 16-36-004 and 006, and walkway easements running through the site to the north, RPC 16-036-002. All of the above with conditions are consistent with the Arlington County plan.
So, excuse me, if you look at the second page of that report, there is a specific planning commission recommendation.
Okay. Very good. Then we find, I was so sorry, I didn't see that. After all of that, the Planning Commission finds that the vacation of, shall I read the whole thing again? Of a portion of public street and utilities easement, that sort of does capture the language that I just.
We got to read that one precisely, Jane. That's one of the ones that they get us for precise.
Okay, I will do it again. The Planning Commission finds that the vacation of 1, a portion of a public street and utilities easement running north from Wilson Boulevard parallel to the west side of North Fort Myer Drive, RPC 16-36-002, and 2, portions of a public street and utilities easement running north from Wilson Boulevard parallel to the west side of North Fort Myer Drive, RPC number 16-36-002, and 3, a portion of a public street and utilities easement running north from Wilson Boulevard parallel to the west side of North Fort Myer Drive, RPC 16-36-004 and 006, and 4, walkway easements running through the site to the north, RPC number 16-036-002, all the above with conditions, is substantially in accord, that's the language, with the adopted comprehensive and applicable portion there of Arlington County, Virginia.
Second,
Commissioner Hughes. Okay, do we have any discussion? No discussion. I will then start calling for the vote. Commissioner Weir. On mute.
Aye.
Commissioner Siegel.
Aye.
Commissioner Schroll.
Aye.
Commissioner Hughes.
Aye.
Commissioner Giron.
Aye.
Commissioner Morton.
Aye.
Commissioner Patel.
Aye.
Commissioner Steinberger.
Aye.
Commissioner Bagley.
Aye.
Commissioner Peterson.
Aye.
Commissioner Sarley is recused. And Commissioner Lantelmi votes aye. It's carried unanimously. And we are finished with AIM Center. And let me just wrap up tonight. Thank you all for my first meeting as chair. I appreciate your patience and your indulgence. Before we go into recess, a little bit of information. We will begin our reconvene meeting on Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. and we'll vote on a motion then to go into our annual closed work session with the county attorney. We will depart from that team's meeting and log into a separate team's meeting with the county attorney. When that ends, we will log off that team's meeting and go back to the original team's meeting no earlier than 7:30 p.m. I thank all of you, the staff, applicants, and our members of the public for your time and consideration this evening. This item will be going to the county board at the January 23rd meeting, and I will be representing the Planning Commission at that meeting. A lot of people labored to get into this. Thank you, Mr. Wood, for making this work. And thank you all. I guess at this point, we can say that the commission meeting will be in recess until Wednesday. I even have a gavel this time. Good night all. And thank you, Ms. Johnson, for making this work so
You
well.
are very welcome.
Good night all. See everybody on Wednesday.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Jane, good health to you and your family.